She thought she was marrying a farmer. She discovered she'd married an empire built on blood. When Eliza Monroe stepped off that stagecoach in 1880s Montana, she believed Nathan Cole's letters, humble wheat fields, honest work, a simple life. But the truth? He controlled half the territory. And the woman who came before her? She died for discovering his secrets. This is the story of a mail-order bride who became a witness, a pawn who became a threat, and a woman who chose justice over survival. Stay until the end, hit that like button, and comment your city below so I can see how far this story travels. Because what happened in Ridgway, Montana changed everything. The stagecoach rattled to a stop in a cloud of dust and dying light, and Eliza Monroe pressed her gloved hand against the window frame, steadying herself as the wheels finally ceased their relentless grinding. Through the scratched glass, she could see Ridgway, Montana Territory, a collection of wooden buildings huddled together like frightened children against the vast, indifferent wilderness. The late afternoon sun painted everything in shades of amber and shadow, making the frontier town look almost welcoming, almost like the beginning of something instead of the end of everything she'd ever known. She was 24 years old, alone, and exactly $3 away from destitution. "Ridgway Station!" the driver called out, his voice weathered and rough. "End of the line, folks. Watch your step now." Eliza gathered her belongings, one carpet bag containing everything she owned in this world, one worn Bible her mother had given her before the fever took her, and one letter creased and reread so many times the paper had gone soft as fabric. The letter that had brought her here, the letter that promised her a future. "Dear Miss Monroe, I am a wheat farmer in Montana Territory, 32 years of age, with a modest homestead and prospects for expansion. I seek a woman of good character and practical disposition for marriage. The work is honest, the land is clean, and while I cannot promise luxury, I can promise respect, protection, and a home. If you are willing to build a life with a man who values hard work and simple truths, I believe we could suit one another well. Yours, respectfully, Nathan Cole." Simple truths. Eliza had clung to those words during the 3-week journey from Boston. Simple truths in a life that had become unbearably complicated after her father's death, after the seamstress shop closed, after the landlord made it clear that a young woman alone could pay her rent in more than one way. She'd chosen Montana instead. She'd chosen a stranger who wrote about wheat and homesteads and honest work. She'd chosen hope over certainty, and now, stepping down from the stagecoach into the dust of Ridgway, she wondered if hope had been foolish all along. "Miss Monroe?" The voice was deep, careful, and when Eliza turned, she saw him for the first time. Nathan Cole was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of storm clouds. He wore work clothes, a simple cotton shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, canvas trousers, and boots that had seen considerable use. His hands, she noticed, were calloused, a working man's hands. He held his hat against his chest and regarded her with an expression that seemed equal parts curiosity and caution. "Mr. Cole," she said, and her voice came out steadier than she'd expected. "Yes, I'm Eliza Monroe." For a moment they simply looked at each other. Eliza was acutely aware of how she must appear, travel-worn, thin from weeks of meager meals, her dark blue dress clean but mended in several places. She'd done her best with her appearance, pinning her brown hair into a neat bun and washing her face at the last station, but she knew she looked like what she was, a woman with no other options, arriving at the last door that might open for her. If Nathan noticed or cared, he didn't show it. He nodded once, placed his hat back on his head, and reached for her carpet bag. "Welcome to Montana Territory," he said. "I hope the journey wasn't too difficult." "It was long," Eliza admitted, "but I'm grateful to be here." She wasn't sure that was true, but it seemed like the right thing to say. Nathan loaded her bag onto a wagon that waited nearby, a simple farm wagon drawn by 2 sturdy horses. Everything about the scene reinforced what his letters had promised: modest, practical, honest. A farmer come to collect his mail-order bride. Eliza climbed onto the wagon seat, arranging her skirts, and tried to quiet the anxious drumming of her heart. "The homestead is about an hour's ride," Nathan said as he took up the reins. "We'll arrive before full dark." "That's fine," Eliza said. Then, because the silence felt too heavy. Your letters mentioned wheat. Is the harvest already done? Mostly. Nathan's eyes stayed on the road ahead. It's been a good year. Dry, but we managed. And the homestead. Is it just you managing the land, or do you hire help? There was the briefest pause before Nathan answered. I have help during harvest season. Otherwise, I manage well enough. Eliza nodded, filing away the information. She'd grown up in Boston, daughter of a clerk, and knew nothing about farming, but she was a quick learner. She'd have to be. Her survival depended on making herself useful, on becoming whatever kind of wife a wheat farmer needed in this harsh, wild place. The wagon rolled through Ridgeway proper, such as it was. Eliza counted one main street, perhaps 20 buildings total, a general store, a saloon, what looked like a land office, a church with a crooked steeple, and a scattering of houses. A few people stopped to watch them pass. A woman in a faded calico dress stood on a porch, her hand shading her eyes, her expression unreadable. Two men outside the saloon paused their conversation, tracking the wagon with their gazes until it turned north onto the open road. Is Ridgeway the nearest town? Eliza asked. Nearest town of any size, Nathan said. There are smaller settlements scattered throughout the valley, homesteads, mostly. Ridgeway has the land office, the territorial magistrate when he visits, and supplies. You'll get to know it well enough. They left the town behind, and the landscape opened before them. Rolling grassland that seemed to stretch forever, broken occasionally by clusters of cottonwood trees following the curves of distant creeks. Mountains rose in the west, their peaks still holding snow despite the late summer heat. The sky was enormous, pressing down with a weight Eliza had never felt in Boston, where buildings crowded close and hemmed in the view. It's very... Eliza searched for a word. Vast. That bothers some people, Nathan said. The space, the quiet. Some women find it lonely. Have there been other women? The question escaped before Eliza could stop it, and she felt her cheeks warm. I'm sorry, that's not my business. It's a fair question. Nathan's voice remained even. No, you're the first. I wrote to the marriage broker in Boston because I decided it was time to settle down properly. A man gets to a certain age, and working alone starts to feel less like independence and more like isolation. Eliza glanced at his profile. Strong jaw, straight nose, the kind of face that would be called handsome if it smiled, though she hadn't seen that yet. And you thought a mail-order bride was the best solution? I thought honesty was the best solution, Nathan said. I could court a local girl, make promises, paint myself as something I'm not. But the truth is simpler. I'm a farmer. I work hard. I don't have much interest in dancing or poetry or romantic nonsense. I need a partner who understands what life here actually requires. Work, endurance, practical sense. You wrote in your letters that you understood that. I believed you. I did understand it, Eliza said quietly. I do understand it. What she didn't say, I understand it because I had no choice. Because I was days away from losing my room, from having nowhere to go, from considerations I don't want to think about. I understand it because you were my last option, not my preferred one. But perhaps Nathan understood that anyway. Perhaps that was why he'd chosen a mail-order bride in the first place, because desperation made for honest agreements, and desperate women didn't ask too many questions. They rode in silence for a while, the wagon wheels creaking rhythmically, the horses' hooves thudding against the packed earth. The sun sank lower, painting the grassland in shades of gold and rust. Eliza tried to imagine her life here, waking in a small farmhouse, cooking meals, mending clothes, perhaps tending a garden. It wouldn't be so different from her life in Boston, really, except for the space, the isolation, the strange man beside her who would become her husband. The justice of the peace comes through Ridgeway once a month, Nathan said, breaking the silence. He'll be there next week. I thought we'd wait until then. Let you settle in first. Make sure... He paused. Make sure this is truly what you want. Eliza looked at him sharply. Are you having second thoughts? No. Nathan's answer was immediate. But I want to give you the chance to have them. You traveled a long way based on letters from a stranger. If you want to turn around, go back. I'll pay for your passage. No hard feelings. It was a kindness, Eliza realized. A genuine offer of escape. and it made her chest tighten with something uncomfortably close to tears because kindness had been so rare lately, and because they both knew she couldn't accept it. "I have $3 to my name," Eliza said, keeping her voice steady. "No family, no prospects back east. I came here because I had nowhere else to go, Mr. Cole. That's the truth of it. Not romantic, not noble, just desperate. If that changes your mind about the arrangement, then I suppose we're both in a difficult position." Nathan was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I appreciate the honesty. You said you valued simple truths." "I do." Something in his voice shifted, became almost wry. "Though I'm learning that simple truths can still be complicated." "Welcome to marriage," Eliza said, and was surprised when Nathan actually smiled. Brief, but real. The landscape began to change as they traveled deeper into the valley. The grassland gave way to cultivated fields, neat rows of stubbled wheat stretching across the bottomland. Irrigation ditches reflected the dying light. Fence lines marked clear boundaries, and Eliza noticed they seemed to go on for a considerable distance. "Your property?" she asked. "Part of it. It's larger than I expected for a modest homestead." Nathan's hands tightened slightly on the reins. "I've been fortunate. Good land, good water, good timing." There was something he wasn't saying. Eliza sensed it, but before she could press the question, the homestead came into view, and Eliza's breath caught in her throat. She'd expected a small cabin, perhaps a barn, maybe a few outbuildings. What she saw instead was an estate. The main house was 2 stories built from solid timber and stone, with a wide porch wrapping around the front and windows that caught the last of the sunlight like amber eyes. A large barn stood to the left, freshly painted, easily twice the size of any barn Eliza had seen in her limited experience. To the right, she saw what looked like a bunkhouse, a smokehouse, a chicken coop, and several other structures she couldn't immediately identify. The whole compound was enclosed by well-maintained fencing, and in the distance she could see another building, maybe another house, or a foreman's quarters. "This is—" Eliza's voice failed her. Nathan brought the wagon to a stop in front of the main house. "This is home." "You said you were a wheat farmer." Eliza turned to stare at him. "You said modest homestead." "I am a wheat farmer." Nathan climbed down from the wagon, not meeting her eyes. "I work the land. The fact that I work more land than some doesn't change what I do." "Mr. Cole," Eliza didn't move from the wagon seat. "This isn't a homestead. This is an estate. This is—" She gestured at the sprawling property. "This is money, considerable money." "It's land," Nathan said. "Land requires work. Come inside. You must be tired." "I want to understand—" "Miss Monroe." Nathan finally looked at her directly, and his expression was unreadable. "You said you came here because you had nowhere else to go. You said you understood what practical partnership meant. This is the partnership I'm offering, this land, this house, this life. Does it matter that it's bigger than you expected?" "It matters that you lied." "I didn't lie." Nathan's voice hardened. "I told you I was a farmer." "I am. I told you I had a homestead. I do. I told you the work was honest. It is. What I didn't tell you was how much I'd managed to accumulate, because I wanted a wife, not a woman chasing money. And now that I'm here, you think I won't ask questions?" "Now that you're here," Nathan said, "I think you'll make a practical decision. You can stay, marry me next week, and have security, safety, and a future. Or you can insist on being offended by my omission, and I'll take you back to Ridgeway in the morning with money for passage east. Your choice." They stared at each other in the dimming light. Eliza's mind raced, trying to reconcile the simple farmer from the letters with this empire sprawled before her, this man who deliberately concealed the truth while calling it honesty. But he was right about one thing: she had no other options. "I'll stay," Eliza said finally, "but I want to understand what I'm walking into, Mr. Cole. No more omissions." Nathan nodded. "Fair enough. Let me get you settled first. Then we'll talk." He reached up to help her down from the wagon, and Eliza took his hand, those calloused, work-worn hands that belonged to a man who was apparently far more than a simple wheat farmer. Her feet touched the ground, and she looked up at the imposing house that would become her home and felt the first true stirring of unease. Because men didn't build estates like this on honest work alone. Not in Montana Territory, not in these years when land was disputed and blood was cheap. And men who concealed the truth about their wealth might conceal other truths as well. The front door opened before Nathan could knock, and a woman appeared, middle-aged, sturdy, with sharp eyes and graying hair pulled into a severe bun. She wore a simple house dress and an apron, and she studied Eliza with an expression that managed to be both welcoming and assessing. "Mrs. Grady," Nathan said, "this is Miss Monroe. She'll be staying in the guest room upstairs. Can you help her get settled?" "Of course, Mr. Cole." Mrs. Grady's voice was brisk, efficient. She stepped aside to let them enter. "I've prepared the room already, and there's supper keeping warm. Miss Monroe, welcome." "Thank you," Eliza managed, stepping into the house. The interior matched the exterior's grandeur. Polished wood floors, a staircase with a carved banister, furniture that looked both expensive and comfortable. Oil lamps cast warm light across everything, and Eliza could smell something cooking that made her stomach clench with sudden, fierce hunger. "Mrs. Grady manages the household," Nathan explained. "She'll help you learn the routines, introduce you to the other staff." "Other staff?" Eliza repeated faintly. "Cook comes in for major meals. 2 girls from town help with laundry and heavy cleaning. And there are the ranch hands, of course, but they stay in the bunkhouse and won't trouble you." Ranch hands, plural. Eliza felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her feet, and she was still trying to find her balance. "Mr. Cole, in your letters you said—" "I know what I said." Nathan's voice was gentle but firm, "and I meant it. This is still just a farm, Miss Monroe, just bigger than you expected. Mrs. Grady, please show Miss Monroe to her room. I'll see you both at supper." He walked away before Eliza could respond, disappearing through a door at the back of the house, leaving her standing in the grand foyer with her worn carpet bag and her growing sense that she'd made a terrible mistake. "This way, dear," Mrs. Grady said, already moving toward the staircase. "You look exhausted. A wash and a rest before supper will do you good." Eliza followed numbly, climbing the stairs, trying not to stare at the paintings on the walls. Landscape scenes, mostly, but expensive ones. The guest room was at the end of the hallway, and when Mrs. Grady opened the door, Eliza stepped into a space larger than the entire room she'd rented in Boston. A 4-poster bed dominated the room, piled with quilts. A wardrobe stood against one wall, a dressing table against another. Lace curtains framed the windows, and a washstand held a porcelain basin and pitcher. It was beautiful. It was overwhelming. "I'll bring hot water," Mrs. Grady said. "Take your time settling in. Supper's in an hour." "Mrs. Grady," Eliza said quickly, before the woman could leave. "How long have you worked for Mr. Cole?" "Going on 8 years now." "And in that time has he ever—" Eliza paused, choosing her words carefully. "Has he ever mentioned bringing a wife here before?" Mrs. Grady's expression shifted, became carefully neutral. "You're the first, Miss Monroe." "But there were others considered?" A longer pause, then— "There was talk of it once, but that was years ago, and nothing came of it. Mr. Cole is a private man, and it's not my place to gossip about his affairs." She softened slightly. "I will say this. He's a fair employer, and an honest one. Whatever brought you here, you could do worse for a husband in this territory." It wasn't quite an endorsement, but it wasn't a warning either. Eliza nodded. "Thank you." Left alone, Eliza sank onto the edge of the bed and let herself feel the full weight of the past 3 weeks. The grief of leaving everything familiar, the fear of the journey, the desperate hope that had sustained her, and now this strange new reality that didn't match anything she'd imagined. She'd expected hardship, isolation, a small cabin, and hard work. She'd expected to earn her keep through cooking and mending, through making herself indispensable to a man who needed help running a modest farm. Instead, she'd arrived at something that looked suspiciously like wealth, married to a man who deliberately misrepresented himself, surrounded by staff and structures that suggested this was far more than honest wheat farming. Eliza stood and walked to the window. From here, she could see the valley spreading out in the dusk, the mountains dark against the dimming sky. Somewhere out there were the other buildings she'd glimpsed, The land that apparently belonged to Nathan Cole, the empire he'd built while calling himself a simple farmer. And somewhere in this house were the answers to questions she was only beginning to formulate. Why had he misrepresented himself? What was he protecting? And what had happened to the other woman Mrs. Grady had almost mentioned, the one there'd been talk of years ago? A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Mrs. Grady returned with a pitcher of hot water and fresh towels. "One more thing, Miss Monroe," the older woman said as she set down the pitcher. "You'll find that folks in Ridgeway have opinions about Mr. Cole. Some respect him, some fear him, some resent him. If I might offer advice, form your own judgment. Don't let gossip make up your mind for you." "Is there much gossip?" "Always is, when a man does well for himself." Mrs. Grady moved toward the door, then paused. "But there's gossip, and then there's truth. Sometimes they overlap, sometimes they don't. You seem like a smart young woman. Trust yourself." She left before Eliza could ask what she meant. Eliza washed her face and hands, changed into her other dress, only marginally better than the one she'd traveled in, and tried to prepare herself for supper. Tried to prepare herself for sitting across from Nathan Cole and demanding real answers, no more omissions, no more careful misdirection. She was pinning up her hair when she heard voices outside, men's voices, low and urgent. Eliza moved to the window and looked down. In the yard below, Nathan stood talking with another man, someone Eliza didn't recognize. The stranger wore better clothes than the ranch hands, and his horse looked expensive. Their conversation was brief, intense, and ended with the stranger riding away at speed while Nathan stood watching, his shoulders tense. Eliza stepped back from the window, her unease deepening. She thought of Mrs. Grady's words. Some respect him, some fear him, some resent him. She thought of the careful way Nathan had phrased everything, never quite lying, but never revealing the full truth. She thought of the estate spread before her, the wealth accumulated in a territory where land disputes were common and violence was cheaper than lawyers. And she thought, with cold clarity, I don't know what I've walked into. But it's not what I expected, and I'm not sure I can walk back out. When the dinner bell rang, Eliza straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and went downstairs to face her future husband, whoever he actually was. The dining room was smaller than she'd expected, more intimate, though the furniture was still finer than anything she'd known. Nathan stood when she entered and gestured to the seat across from him. "I hope the room is comfortable," he said. "It's lovely." Eliza sat, folding her hands in her lap. "More than I expected, like everything else." Nathan had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. "I suppose we should have that conversation now." "I suppose we should." Mrs. Grady entered with plates of food, beef stew, fresh bread, vegetables that must have come from a substantial garden. She served them efficiently and withdrew, leaving them alone. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Eliza said, "Who was the man who came to see you, the one who rode away so quickly?" Nathan's eyebrows rose. "You were watching?" "I was standing by the window. I didn't mean to spy, but I couldn't help noticing the conversation looked urgent." "That was James Hartford. He manages one of the line shacks on the eastern property." Nathan cut into his bread. There had been some trouble with fence lines, nothing serious. "One of the line shacks," Eliza repeated. "How many properties do you own, Mr. Cole?" Nathan set down his knife. 3 main parcels, plus the homestead here. About 2,200 acres total, though not all of it is under cultivation." 2,200 acres. Eliza had no frame of reference for that number, but she knew it was substantial. "And you manage all of this yourself?" "I have foremen, ranch hands. During harvest, I hire additional help from town." He met her eyes. "I work the land personally, Miss Monroe. I'm not some absentee owner, but yes, I have help. A man would be a fool to try managing this much alone." "A modest homestead," Eliza said quietly. "I grew up on a modest homestead," Nathan said. 40 acres, barely enough to support a family. I remember what that was like. The constant worry, one bad year away from losing everything. When I had the chance to expand, I took it. I kept taking it. And yes, I've done well. But I'm still a farmer. I still work this land with my own hands." "How did you expand so quickly?" Eliza asked. "Land in Montana territory isn't cheap, and you're what, 32? How does a man accumulate 2,200 acres by 32? Nathan was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, carefully, "That's not an answer. It's the only answer I can give you right now." He leaned forward. "Miss Monroe, Eliza, I understand your confusion. I understand why you feel misled, but there are aspects of my business that are complicated, that involve other people's interests, that I can't fully explain in one evening. What I can tell you is that I've never broken the law. I've never hurt anyone. I've built something legitimate through hard work and smart decisions. That's the truth. But not the whole truth." "No," Nathan admitted. "Not the whole truth. Not yet." Eliza studied him. This man who'd written her careful, modest letters while sitting in this grand house, who dressed like a common farmer while owning enough land to support a small town, who met her eyes now with something that looked almost like regret. "Will you ever tell me the whole truth?" she asked. "If you stay," Nathan said, "if you marry me, then yes, eventually you'll understand everything. But I need time, Eliza. Time for you to see that I'm not dangerous, that this life isn't dangerous. Time for you to decide if you can trust me." "You're asking me to marry you on faith." "I'm asking you to marry me on practical terms," Nathan corrected. "You need security. I need a wife. We don't have to love each other, but we do need to trust each other eventually. Can you give me that time?" Eliza looked at her plate, at the abundance of food, at the expensive dishes and silver utensils. She thought of her $3, her lack of options, the long journey that had brought her here. "I don't have much choice, do I?" she said. "You always have a choice." Nathan's voice was gentle. "But yes, some choices are harder than others." They finished the meal in near silence, and afterward Nathan showed her around the first floor of the house. The parlor, the library, with more books than Eliza had seen outside of Boston, the office where he managed his accounts. Everything was well-appointed, expensive, carefully maintained. "You'll have access to all of this," Nathan said. "Mrs. Grady will help you learn how everything runs. You won't lack for anything." "Except honesty," Eliza said. Nathan stopped walking. "That's fair. But Eliza, understand, I'm trying to protect you. There are things about this territory, about how business works here, that are better learned gradually. If I overwhelm you with everything at once, you'll run. And he paused. "I don't want you to run." There was something vulnerable in his voice, something that made Eliza see him differently for just a moment, not as a man concealing secrets, but as someone genuinely trying to build something, to make this strange arrangement work, despite its awkward beginning. "I won't run," Eliza said quietly. "But I won't be kept in the dark forever either. If we're going to be partners, Mr. Cole, then I need to be treated as one. Eventually." "Eventually," Nathan agreed. "I promise." That night, lying in the grand guest room with moonlight streaming through the lace curtains, Eliza stared at the ceiling and tried to make sense of everything. She'd come here expecting hardship and found luxury. She'd come expecting loneliness and found a household of staff. She'd come expecting honesty and found careful omissions. But she'd also come expecting to have no choice. And that, at least, remained true. In the morning, she would wake in this strange house and begin learning how to be Nathan Cole's wife. She would marry him in a week, become mistress of this estate, take on whatever responsibilities that entailed. She would do it because she had to, because survival sometimes meant accepting situations that weren't what you'd hoped for, because sometimes the only way forward was through. But she would also do something else. She would watch, listen, and learn. She would figure out what Nathan was hiding and why. She would understand the empire he'd built and how he'd built it. And she would decide on her own terms whether she could live with whatever truth she uncovered. Because Eliza Monroe might be desperate, might be poor, might be out of options, but she wasn't stupid, and she wasn't blind. And if Nathan Cole thought she'd be content playing the grateful bride who asked no questions, he was about to discover he'd chosen the wrong woman for that role. Morning came too early, announced by roosters and the sound of men's voices in the yard below. Eliza dressed quickly in the dim pre-dawn light, choosing her sturdier dress and pinning her hair back with efficient movements. Whatever this day held, she would face it directly. No more confusion, no more passive acceptance. If she was going to be Nathan Cole's wife, she needed to understand exactly what that meant. She found Nathan in the kitchen, already dressed for work, drinking coffee while Mrs. Grady prepared breakfast. He looked up when she entered, surprise flickering across his face. "You're up early?" he said. "I'm used to working." Eliza accepted the coffee Mrs. Grady poured for her. "In Boston, the seamstress shop opened at 6. I thought I'd see how things run here." Nathan studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Fair enough. After breakfast, I'll show you around properly. The full operation, not just the house." "I'd appreciate that." They ate quickly. Eggs, bacon, fresh bread with butter that tasted nothing like the margarine Eliza had survived on in Boston. Through the kitchen window, she could see ranch hands gathering by the barn, perhaps a dozen men, all armed. She noticed that detail immediately. Every single one wore a pistol on his hip. "Why are they armed?" she asked. Nathan followed her gaze. "This is Montana territory, Eliza. Everyone's armed. It's practical, not threatening." "For protection against what?" "Wolves, bears, sometimes cattle thieves." Nathan stood carrying his plate to the wash basin. "Sometimes disputes with neighbors over water rights or fence lines. It's the reality of frontier life." But the way he said it, carefully, as though choosing each word, made Eliza think there was more to the story. She filed the observation away and followed him outside. The morning air was crisp and cold, carrying the smell of hay and horses and wood smoke. The sun hadn't yet cleared the mountains, and everything was painted in shades of blue and gray. Nathan led her toward the barn, where the ranch hands had gathered. Their conversation stopped when they saw Eliza approach. "Men," Nathan said, his voice carrying authority Eliza hadn't heard before. "This is Miss Eliza Monroe. We'll be married next week, and she'll be mistress of this house. You'll treat her with the same respect you show me. Understood?" A chorus of "yes, sir" and "ma'am" followed. The men ranged in age from barely 20 to well past 50, all weathered by sun and work, all wearing those ubiquitous pistols. They regarded Eliza with curiosity but not hostility. "That's Tom Fletcher," Nathan indicated a gray-haired man who nodded to Eliza. "He's the foreman. Been with me since I started expanding. Anything you need from the men, you go through Tom." "Ma'am," Tom said, touching the brim of his hat. His voice was rough but respectful. "Welcome to the Cole Ranch." "Thank you, Mr. Fletcher." Nathan continued introducing the key personnel, the barn manager, the lead wrangler, the men who handled irrigation and fence maintenance. Eliza tried to commit names and faces to memory, aware that these men would be her responsibility too once she married Nathan. Their wages, their housing, their complaints and conflicts, all of it would fall partially to her. It was overwhelming, and it raised the same question that had kept her awake half the night. How did a wheat farmer need this many employees? After the introductions, Nathan led her on a tour of the immediate compound. The barn was immaculate, housing perhaps 30 horses, all of them looking well-fed and well-trained. The equipment shed held machinery Eliza couldn't identify, but which looked expensive and modern. The bunkhouse where the hands slept was clean and well-maintained, better than many boarding houses Eliza had seen in Boston. "The chickens are Mrs. Grady's domain," Nathan explained as they walked past the coop. "She manages the household animals and the kitchen garden. You'll want to work with her on meal planning and household accounts." "How many people am I feeding?" "Depends on the season. Right now, about 15 men plus household staff. During harvest, it can be up to 30. 30 people. Eliza felt dizzy. "And the cost of all this gets offset by production," Nathan said. "A good harvest year more than covers operational costs. Last year was excellent. This year's been good too." They walked beyond the main compound, following a wagon road that led east. The land rolled gently here, covered in stubbled wheat fields that stretched to the horizon. Irrigation ditches caught the early morning light, and Eliza could see the careful engineering that had gone into water management. "How much of this is yours?" she asked. "Everything you can see from here to those cottonwoods." Nathan pointed to a distant tree line. "That's the eastern boundary of the main property. The river runs along there, which is why this land is so valuable. Water rights in Montana territory can make or break a ranch." "And your other properties?" Nathan's jaw tightened slightly. "The north parcel is grazing land, about 800 acres. Good for cattle, though I focus mainly on wheat. The south parcel is smaller, but it has timber rights. And there's a section near town that I'm holding for, he paused, for future development. Future development, Eliza repeated. That sounds like more than farming, Mr. Cole. Nathan, he corrected. And yes, I suppose it is. A smart man diversifies, Eliza. Wheat prices fluctuate. Weather can destroy a harvest. I've learned to have multiple income streams. They walked in silence for a few minutes, Eliza processing everything she was seeing and hearing. The scale of the operation was staggering. This wasn't a homestead that had gradually expanded through hard work and good luck. This was deliberate, aggressive acquisition of land and resources. This was empire building. Who owned this land before you? She asked finally. The question hung in the air between them. Nathan stopped walking and turned to face her directly. Various people, he said carefully. Some sold willingly, some needed money and took my offers. A few parcels were acquired through the land office when previous claims fell through. Fell through how? Eliza, this is complicated. Then uncomplicate it. She kept her voice calm but firm. You promised me honesty eventually. I'm asking for it now. How did you acquire 2,200 acres in a territory where land is precious and people kill each other over water rights? Because that's what you're talking about, isn't it? When you arm your ranch hands, when you talk about disputes with neighbors, that's not about wolves and cattle thieves. That's about protecting what you've taken from people who didn't want to give it up. Nathan's expression darkened. I haven't taken anything that wasn't legally mine to acquire. Legal and right aren't always the same thing. No, he agreed quietly. They're not. But I've worked within the law, Eliza. I've made smart purchases, sometimes hard purchases, but legal ones. I won't apologize for succeeding in a place where most men fail. I'm not asking you to apologize. I'm asking you to tell me the truth about what I'm becoming part of. They stared at each other, and Eliza saw the moment Nathan made his decision. He gestured to a large outcropping of rock nearby. Sit with me. I'll tell you some of it. Not all, not yet, but enough that you understand what you're asking. They settled on the sun-warmed stone, looking out over the golden fields. Nathan was quiet for a long moment before he spoke. My father was a homesteader, he said finally. 40 acres of marginal land, barely enough to feed 4 children. I watched him work himself to death trying to make it produce, watched my mother stretch every penny until it screamed. When I was 16, a drought hit. We lost everything, the land, the house, everything. My parents died that winter, fever and pneumonia, but really it was despair that killed them. He paused, and Eliza saw real pain in his face. I swore I'd never be that vulnerable again, Nathan continued, never be at the mercy of weather or chance or other men's decisions. So when I got my own homestead claim at 21, I worked like a demon. I saved every cent. And when the opportunity came to buy adjoining land from a man who wanted to leave Montana, I borrowed money and bought it. Then I bought more. And more. How did you borrow that much money? Eliza asked. There was a man, Nathan said slowly, a businessman from back east who saw potential in Montana territory. He provided capital to men he thought would succeed in exchange for certain considerations. What kind of considerations? Support for his business interests, help acquiring specific properties he wanted, information about local land office dealings. Nathan met her eyes. Nothing illegal, Eliza, but not entirely comfortable either. Who is this man? His name is Charles Morrison. He owns mining interests, timber rights, and he's heavily invested in the railroad expansion. He's the one who provided the initial capital that let me start expanding. I've paid back every cent with interest, but the connection remains. He's politically powerful, and association with him opens doors. Eliza felt cold despite the warming sun. And closes others, I imagine. Men with that kind of power usually make enemies. Yes, Nathan's admission was quiet. Morrison has enemies, and by extension, so do I. There are people in this territory who resent outside capital, who see Morrison as a carpetbagger trying to steal Montana's resources. They view anyone associated with him as complicit in that theft. Are they wrong? I don't know, Nathan said honestly. Morrison's money has helped build real infrastructure here, mills, roads, irrigation systems that benefit everyone. But he's also pushed out smaller operators, consolidated land holdings, changed the power structure. Whether that's progress or exploitation depends on your perspective. Eliza turned this information over in her mind. And the other landowners around here, the ones you bought from or competed with, how do they feel about you? Mixed, Nathan admitted. Some respect success, some resent it, and some, he hesitated. Some believe I used underhanded methods to acquire their land. Did you? I used every legal method available. Sometimes that meant buying debt and calling it due. Sometimes that meant purchasing water rights that made adjacent properties less valuable, then buying those properties at reduced prices. Sometimes that meant outbidding others at land office auctions when claims were forfeited. He looked at her directly. Was it ruthless? Yes. Was it illegal? No. But it made you enemies. Significant ones, yes. Eliza stood, pacing a few steps away from the rock. Below them, the wheat fields stretched golden and peaceful, but now she understood what lay beneath that tranquility: conflict, resentment, ruthless ambition. Nathan had built his empire legally, perhaps, but not gently, and now she was being asked to become part of it, to take her place as mistress of land that others believed should have been theirs. Who specifically opposes you? She asked. If I'm staying here, I need to know who considers me their enemy by association. Nathan stood too, joining her at the edge of the outcropping. The Hendricks family lost about 300 acres when I bought their debt 2 years ago. They're still bitter about it. The Cartwright Ranch to the north competes with me for water rights and grazing land. We've had several ugly disputes. And there's a group of smaller homesteaders who believe I'm trying to force them out to expand further. Are you? No. I have enough land, but they don't believe that, and my connection to Morrison makes them suspicious. He paused. There's also the political dimension. Morrison supports the territorial governor and the push for statehood, which means supporting the Republican establishment. That makes enemies of the Democrats and various reform movements who see corruption in the current system. Eliza pressed her hand to her forehead, feeling overwhelmed. So I'm not just marrying a wheat farmer. I'm marrying into territorial politics, land disputes, and a web of alliances and enemies that I don't understand and didn't choose. Yes, Nathan said simply. That's the truth you wanted. That's what you're walking into. Why me? Eliza turned to face him. If you're this wealthy, this connected, why send for a mail-order bride from Boston? You could have courted any woman in Montana territory, made a strategic marriage alliance that would have strengthened your position. Nathan's expression shifted, became almost vulnerable. Because every woman in Montana territory knows exactly who I am and what I represent. They'd marry me for the money or the power or because their families pressured them into a strategic alliance. I wanted someone who saw me as a wheat farmer first, who chose me for practical reasons but honest ones. Someone who wasn't already part of this political mess. Someone you could keep ignorant, Eliza said. Someone I could protect from the uglier realities until she was committed enough to weather them, Nathan corrected. I wasn't trying to deceive you, Eliza. I was trying to give you, and us, a chance at something uncomplicated before the complications became unavoidable. A shout from below interrupted them. They both turned to see Tom Fletcher riding hard toward their position, his horse lathered and his face grim. He reined in at the base of the outcropping. "Mr. Cole," he called up. "Trouble at the north fence line. Hendricks and his sons cut through about 50 yards of wire. They're on our grazing land with their cattle." Nathan's jaw clenched. "How many of them?" 4 men that we saw, all armed. They told our boys to back off or there'd be bloodshed." Eliza felt her heart skip. This wasn't theoretical anymore. This was the reality Nathan had been describing, playing out in real time. "Get 6 men mounted," Nathan ordered. "I'll be down in 2 minutes." He turned to Eliza. "I need to handle this. Tom will escort you back to the house." "I'm coming with you," Eliza said. "Absolutely not. If I'm going to be your wife, I need to understand what that means. I need to see how these disputes actually unfold." "Eliza, these situations can turn violent. Then I need to see that too." She kept her voice steady despite her fear. "You just told me I'm walking into territorial politics and land disputes. You can't shelter me from the reality while also expecting me to accept it. I'm coming with you." Nathan looked torn, clearly wanting to refuse but also recognizing the truth in her words. Finally, he nodded curtly. "You stay behind me at all times. You do exactly what I say. And if shooting starts, you hit the ground and stay down. Understood?" "Understood." They rode north with 8 men, Nathan and Eliza on horseback with the ranch hands surrounding them. Eliza had ridden occasionally in Boston, sedate park circuits, but this was different. The pace was hard, the terrain rough, and she had to concentrate on staying mounted while her mind raced with anxiety about what they were riding toward. The north fence line came into view after 20 minutes of hard riding. Eliza could see the destroyed section immediately, fence posts knocked down, wire cut and trampled, a gap wide enough to drive cattle through. And there, on coal land, were perhaps 40 head of cattle bearing the Hendricks brand, grazing peacefully while 4 armed men sat their horses watching. Nathan reined in about 50 yards away. His men formed a line behind him, all of them with hands resting casually on their holstered pistols. The Hendricks men mirrored the posture. Eliza's mouth went dry. This was how range wars started. 2 groups of armed men facing each other over disputed boundaries, each believing they had right on their side. "Hendricks," Nathan called out, his voice carrying across the distance. "You're on my land with your cattle. That's trespassing and theft of grazing." The man who rode forward was perhaps 50, weathered and hard-eyed. His sons, Eliza assumed, flanked him, younger versions of the same face, equally hostile. "Your land," Hendricks spat. "This was open range before you came along with your fences and your bought judges. My cattle have grazed this section for 15 years. And for the last 2 years since I legally purchased this parcel, you've been told to keep them off," Nathan said. "I've been patient, Hendricks. I've warned you. I've given you time to adjust your routes, but cutting my fence is destruction of property, and I won't tolerate it." "What are you going to do, Cole? Shoot us?" Hendricks' hand moved toward his pistol. "Go ahead. Do it in front of your mail-order bride there. Show her what kind of man she's marrying." Eliza felt every eye turn to her. She sat her horse as steadily as she could, refusing to show fear even as her heart hammered against her ribs. "I don't want bloodshed," Nathan said, his voice dangerously calm. "I want you to remove your cattle from my land, repair the fence you destroyed, and agree to respect the property lines going forward. And if I refuse, then I'll file charges with the territorial magistrate, and you'll lose more than grazing rights. You'll lose your own land when the fines exceed your ability to pay." Hendricks' face flushed red. "You already stole 300 acres from me through your crooked banker friends. Now you want to threaten me with more legal theft?" "I bought debt you couldn't pay," Nathan said. "That's not theft. That's business. You made bad decisions, borrowed more than you could return, and suffered the consequences. I'm sorry for your situation, but it doesn't give you the right to trespass." "Business," Hendricks repeated bitterly. "You call it business. I call it a man with Eastern money coming in and destroying honest ranchers who were here first." One of his sons spoke up, his voice tight with anger. "My father built this ranch with his own hands, fought Indians, survived winters that killed half the territory, and you just swept in with Morrison's dirty money and took it all because we had 2 bad years." "3 bad years," Nathan corrected quietly, "and I gave you chance after chance to restructure the debt before I bought it. I'm not the villain you want me to be, Hendricks. I'm just a man who made different choices than you did." "You're a man who destroys families," Hendricks said, "and one day, Cole, someone's going to destroy you right back. Maybe not today. Maybe not this year. But you're making too many enemies. Eventually they'll band together, and your money and your hired guns won't be enough." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Eliza could feel the tension radiating from Nathan's men, could see fingers inching toward weapons. One wrong word, one sudden movement, and this would explode into violence. "Tom," Nathan said quietly, not taking his eyes off Hendricks. "Ride into town. Get Sheriff Morrison. Tell him we have a fence dispute that needs official resolution." "Sheriff Morrison," Hendricks laughed harshly. "Charles Morrison's nephew. How convenient that the law in this territory is related to your patron. I'm sure we'll get a fair hearing." "Would you prefer I handle this myself?" Nathan's voice dropped, became colder. "Because we can settle this right now, Hendricks, without the law. Is that what you want?" Eliza saw Hendricks' sons tense, saw Nathan's men shift in their saddles. This was the moment, the point where words would give way to bullets. She acted without thinking, urging her horse forward past Nathan's protective line. "Mr. Hendricks," she said, her voice surprisingly steady, "my name is Eliza Monroe. As you've observed, I'm new to Montana territory. I don't know the history between you and Mr. Cole, and I won't pretend to judge who's right and who's wrong. But I do know that if shooting starts here today, some of you won't go home to your families tonight. Is grazing land worth dying for? Is it worth killing for?" "Miss Monroe," Nathan started, but Eliza held up a hand. "I'm not finished." She looked at Hendricks directly. "You're angry. I understand that. You feel you've been wronged, that you've lost something that should have been yours. Maybe you're right. Maybe the system is corrupt and unjust. But killing each other over it won't fix the system. It'll just create widows and orphans and more bitterness." Hendricks stared at her, some of the rage fading from his face, replaced by something like surprise. "Pretty speech, ma'am, but it doesn't change the facts." "No," Eliza agreed, "but maybe it changes how we respond to those facts. Mr. Cole says he'll file charges if you don't leave. You say the law here is corrupt, so prove it. Let him file his charges. Let the magistrate rule. And if the ruling is unjust, make sure everyone in the territory knows it. Create a record of corruption instead of just complaining about it. And in the meantime, I lose my cattle's grazing land?" "In the meantime, you don't lose your life," Eliza said. "And neither do your sons. Surely that's worth something." For a long moment, no one moved. Then Hendricks let out a long breath and lowered his hand from his pistol. "You got yourself an interesting wife, Cole," he said. "Smart and brave, which is more than you deserve." He turned to his sons. "Round up the cattle. We're leaving." "Pa," one of them started to protest. "I said we're leaving." Hendricks' voice was iron. "The lady's right. I won't make my boys orphans over grazing land, no matter how wronged I feel. We'll fight this legal, like she says. Let the whole territory see how Morrison's nephew rules." They began moving their cattle back through the destroyed fence section. As they worked, Hendricks rode closer to where Eliza sat her horse, Nathan tense beside her. "Word of advice, ma'am," Hendricks said quietly. "You seem like a decent woman. Don't let Cole's money make you forget that other folks are decent too. We're not all lazy fools who deserve to lose our land. Some of us just had bad luck and faced a system that was rigged against us." "I'll remember that, Mr. Hendricks." He nodded once and rode away to help his sons. Within 20 minutes, the cattle were back on Hendricks' land, and the men were mounting up to leave. But before they did, the youngest Hendricks' son turned back, his face flushed with anger and humiliation. "This ain't over, Cole," he shouted. "You might have won today, but Pa's right. You're making too many enemies, and one of these days you're going to push someone too far, and they're going to push back, hard." Then they were gone, dust rising behind them as they rode west. Nathan's men remained in position for several minutes, watching to make sure the Hendricks group truly departed. Finally, Tom Fletcher spoke. "That was well done, ma'am. Took courage to ride out there like that." "Or foolishness," Nathan said tightly. He turned to Eliza. "You could have been shot." "So could you," Eliza replied, "and you were about to be until someone provided a reason to step back. You're welcome, by the way." Nathan's jaw worked, clearly torn between anger at her risk-taking and grudging respect for her outcome. "We'll discuss this back at the house. Tom, leave 2 men here to repair the fence. The rest of you, back to work. And someone ride to town, tell Sheriff Morrison what happened. I want it on record, even if it doesn't result in charges." The ride back to the compound was silent and tense. Eliza's hand shook slightly on the reins as the adrenaline began to fade, replaced by the terrifying understanding of how close they'd come to violence. Men with guns, facing each other over land disputes, seconds away from bloodshed, and she'd ridden right into the middle of it. When they reached the barn, Nathan dismounted and helped Eliza down, his hands gripping her waist firmly. The moment her feet touched ground, he pulled her aside, away from the ranch hands. "Don't ever do that again," he said, his voice low and fierce. "Don't ever put yourself at risk like that." "I did what needed doing," Eliza said, though her voice shook slightly. "Those men were going to shoot each other, Nathan, over cattle and grazing rights. It's insane." "It's Montana territory," Nathan said. Land and water are everything here. Men do kill over them. And you standing between armed groups doesn't change that. It just means you could get caught in the crossfire. But I didn't get caught in the crossfire. I stopped the crossfire. Eliza pulled away from him, needing space. You told me I needed to understand what I was walking into. Well, now I understand. You have enemies, Nathan. Real ones. People who hate you enough to risk their lives confronting you. And from what I saw today, they might have good reason. Nathan's expression hardened. You heard one side of a complicated story. I heard a man who lost land his family had worked for generations, who believes the system is corrupt, and you're part of that corruption. Is he wrong? He made bad business decisions and couldn't recover from them. That's not corruption, that's capitalism. When the banker, the judge, and the sheriff are all connected to the same power structure that benefited from his failure, that feels corrupt, Nathan, even if it's technically legal. Eliza pressed her hand to her forehead, suddenly exhausted. I need to think. I need to process what I just saw and what it means. Eliza, please. She held up her hand. Just give me some time. I'm not running. I'm not rejecting anything. I just need to think. She walked toward the house, leaving Nathan standing in the yard. Mrs. Grady met her at the door, concern evident on her face. Lord have mercy, child, you look pale as milk. Come sit down. I'll make tea. Eliza let herself be led to the kitchen, let Mrs. Grady fuss over her with tea and biscuits. But her mind wouldn't settle, kept replaying the confrontation at the fence line, the hatred in Hendricks' voice, the fear of violence, the terrible understanding that this was Nathan's reality. This was the life she was agreeing to join. Mrs. Grady, she said finally. What happened to the land Mr. Cole acquired from the Hendricks family? Mrs. Grady's hands stilled in her work. That's complicated history, Miss Monroe. I need uncomplicated answers. The older woman sighed and sat down across from Eliza. Hendricks had debt with a bank in Helena, bad harvests, some poor investments, medical expenses when his wife was sick. The debt got sold to another entity, and when Hendricks couldn't pay, that entity foreclosed. Mr. Cole bought the land at auction. What entity bought the debt? One of Mr. Morrison's holding companies. Eliza closed her eyes. So Morrison acquired the debt, foreclosed on the property, and then conveniently sold it to his protege at a price Nathan could afford. I don't know the business details, Miss Monroe. I just know Mr. Cole acquired the land legally. Legally, Eliza repeated. Does everyone keep using that word because it's the only defense available? Because legal and ethical aren't the same thing? Mrs. Grady's expression softened. You're trying to decide if you can live with who Mr. Cole is and how he got where he is. That's fair. But let me tell you what I know about the man. He's never lied to me, never cheated me, never treated anyone in his household poorly. He pays fair wages, provides good conditions, and deals honestly with the people who work for him. Whatever happened with the Hendricks land, whatever role Morrison played, Mr. Cole has built something real here, something that provides for a lot of families. Including yours? Including mine, Mrs. Grady admitted. So yes, I'm biased, but I'm also observant, and I've watched Mr. Cole handle conflict many times. He tries negotiation first, compensation when possible, and force only when necessary. That's more than most men in this territory can claim. Eliza wanted to believe that. Wanted to see Nathan as the pragmatic businessman rather than the ruthless empire builder. But after this morning, after seeing the hatred in Hendricks' eyes and understanding its source, she couldn't quite manage it. She spent the rest of the day in her room, watching from the window as ranch operations continued below. Men repaired equipment, moved horses, conducted the daily business of running a large agricultural operation. Everything looked normal, peaceful even. But now Eliza understood what lay beneath that surface: conflict, coercion, and an empire built on the broken dreams of men like Hendricks. That evening, Nathan knocked on her door. May I come in? Eliza considered refusing, but that would only delay the inevitable. Yes. He entered, still wearing his work clothes, looking tired and troubled. I wanted to apologize. You were right to come today. to see how these situations unfold. I've been trying to protect you from the uglier realities, but that's not fair to either of us." "No," Eliza agreed. "It's not." Nathan sat in the chair by the window, leaving space between them. "I also wanted to explain something about the Hendricks situation. What you didn't hear today is that I offered to buy their land outright before the foreclosure. I offered them market value, which would have paid off their debt and left them with money to start over. They refused, said they wouldn't sell to Morrison's man, that they'd rather lose it all than deal with me." Eliza absorbed this. So pride destroyed them as much as debt. Pride and stubbornness, yes. But that doesn't make what happened right, and I know that. I know Morrison manipulated the situation to get me land I wanted. I benefited from a corrupt system, even if I followed its rules. He met her eyes. "I'm not asking you to excuse that. I'm asking if you can live with a man who's compromised in that way, who's built something real but not entirely clean." It was the most honest he'd been since she arrived. Eliza appreciated that, even as it complicated her feelings further. "I don't know yet," she said. "I need more time. The justice of the peace comes in 5 days." "I know. Do you want me to postpone the wedding?" Eliza considered the question seriously. If she postponed, would anything really change? Would she suddenly develop clear moral conviction about Nathan's empire building? Or would she simply be delaying an inevitable decision, marry him despite his compromises, or leave Montana Territory with $3 and no future? "No," she said finally. "Don't postpone. But Nathan, I need you to promise me something." "What?" "No more secrets. No more careful omissions. If I'm going to be your wife, your partner in this enterprise, then I need to know everything. The full truth about Morrison, about your business dealings, about where this empire came from and where it's going. I need to make an informed choice, not a blind one." Nathan was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Tomorrow, I'll show you the account books, the contracts, the correspondence, the full financial picture. And I'll tell you about the railroad deal." "What railroad deal?" "The reason Morrison wanted me married before year's end," Nathan said. "The reason timing matters, why certain territorial politicians are nervous, and why I've been expanding so aggressively. Tomorrow, I'll explain it all. And then you can decide if you want to be part of it or not." He stood to leave, but paused at the door. "For what it's worth, Eliza, I'm glad you came today. I'm glad you saw the ugliness instead of just hearing about it secondhand. Because now when you make your decision, it'll be based on reality, not fantasy, and whatever you decide, I'll respect it." After he left, Eliza stood at the window watching darkness settle over the valley. Somewhere out there, Hendricks and his sons were nursing their humiliation and anger. Somewhere, other displaced landowners were plotting their resentment. And somewhere, men like Charles Morrison were moving pieces on a board only they could see, using people like Nathan, and now Eliza, to build their vision of Montana's future. She thought about the mail-order bride who'd left Boston 3 weeks ago, believing she was marrying a simple wheat farmer. That woman seemed impossibly naive now, almost another person entirely. Because the woman standing at this window understood something that naive girl hadn't. Power was never simple, empires were never clean, and survival sometimes meant making compromises that haunted you forever. The question was whether she could live with those compromises, or whether her conscience would demand she walk away from the only security she'd been offered in years. Tomorrow, Nathan would show her the full picture. Tomorrow, she'd see the complete architecture of what she was being asked to join. And then she'd have to choose. Not between good and evil, because nothing in Montana Territory seemed that clear, but between practical survival and moral purity, between Nathan's flawed empire and her own desperate circumstances. It wasn't the choice she'd imagined making when she answered his advertisement. But then again, nothing about this situation was what she'd imagined, and perhaps that was the real lesson of the frontier, that survival meant adapting to realities you never anticipated, and that sometimes strength meant accepting situations that were far from ideal because the alternatives were worse. Eliza pressed her forehead against the cool glass and tried to imagine herself as mistress of this empire, partner to a man whose wealth was built on the broken dreams of his neighbors, complicit in a system she found morally troubling but couldn't deny benefited her directly. Could she live with that? She didn't know yet. But she was beginning to suspect the answer was yes. Not because she wanted to, but because she had to. Because survival had always required compromise. And Montana Territory simply made that truth more obvious than polite Boston society ever had. Tomorrow would bring more revelations, more complications, more reasons to walk away. But Eliza suspected that when the time came to actually decide, she'd stay. Not for love, not even for money, really, but for something more fundamental, the chance to matter, to have power, to be something more than a desperate seamstress with $3 and no future. Even if that something came with a price she wasn't sure she could afford. The next morning arrived with unexpected warmth, sunlight streaming through Eliza's window and painting everything gold. She dressed carefully, choosing her better dress because today felt significant. The day Nathan would finally reveal the full architecture of his empire. The day she'd understand completely what she was choosing. But when she came downstairs, Mrs. Grady met her with an anxious expression. "Mr. Cole had to ride out early, Miss Monroe. Trouble at the South Timber parcel, some equipment damaged, possibly vandalism. He said to tell you he'll be back by noon, and you should wait for him before going through the account books." Eliza felt a flash of frustration. Another delay, another complication. "How long has he been gone?" "Left before dawn. Tom Fletcher went with him and 4 men. They expected it might be another confrontation like yesterday." The worry in Mrs. Grady's voice was evident, and Eliza felt an answering anxiety in her own chest. Nathan riding into potential danger, possibly facing more angry landowners, while she waited helplessly at the house. She hated it. "Is there anything I can do while I wait?" Eliza asked. "Some way to make myself useful?" Mrs. Grady's expression brightened slightly. "Well, there is the household inventory to review, and I could show you the account books for domestic expenses. You'll need to understand those regardless. It's not the business side Mr. Cole handles, but it's important work." "That sounds perfect." They spent the next 2 hours in Mrs. Grady's small office off the kitchen, reviewing supplies, expenses, and the complex logistics of feeding and housing 15 to 30 people depending on the season. Eliza was surprised by how much she understood. Her years managing the seamstress shop's meager finances had taught her careful accounting, and these books were simply a larger scale of the same principles. "You have a good head for numbers," Mrs. Grady observed. "Mr. Cole will appreciate that. The last woman who—" She stopped abruptly, her face flushing. Eliza looked up sharply. "The last woman who what?" "Nothing, Miss Monroe. I misspoke." "Mrs. Grady." Eliza kept her voice gentle but firm. "Yesterday you mentioned there'd been talk of Mr. Cole bringing a wife here before, and just now you started to say something about another woman. If there's history I should know about, please tell me. I can't keep stumbling over secrets." Mrs. Grady set down her pen, her hands trembling slightly. "It's not my place to discuss it." "Then whose place is it? Nathan's? Because he's shown a remarkable talent for omitting important information." Eliza leaned forward. "Please, if I'm walking into something, I need to understand what it is." The older woman was quiet for a long moment, clearly wrestling with loyalty and conscience. Finally, she sighed deeply. "Her name was Clara Jennings. She came here 4 years ago." Eliza's blood went cold. "Another mail-order bride?" "Yes. She was from Ohio, I think. Or maybe Indiana. Somewhere back east. She arrived just like you did. Stagecoach, carpetbag, full of hope and fear." Mrs. Grady's eyes grew distant. "She was younger than you. 21, maybe 22. Blonde hair, pretty in a delicate way. Too delicate for Montana, I thought when I first saw her." "What happened to her?" "She stayed about 3 months. At first, everything seemed fine. She learned the household routines, started preparing for the wedding. Mr. Cole seemed pleased with the arrangement. But then—" Mrs. Grady paused, choosing her words carefully. "She started asking questions about the business, about where the money came from, about some of the land acquisitions. She was curious, always poking around in places she shouldn't." "Like the account books?" "Among other things. She'd ride out to the properties, talk to the ranch hands, ask about previous owners. Mr. Cole told her to stop, said she was stirring up trouble. They argued about it several times." Eliza felt her chest tighten. "And then?" "And then one morning, she was gone. Left a note saying she couldn't go through with the marriage, that Montana territory wasn't right for her. She took the stagecoach back east, and we never heard from her again. The story sounded plausible enough, but something in Mrs. Grady's tone suggested there was more to it. You don't believe that's what really happened? I believe she left, Mrs. Grady said carefully. I saw her get on that stagecoach myself, but the weeks before she left, she seemed frightened, not just nervous about the marriage, genuinely frightened, and some of the questions she'd been asking. The older woman shook her head. She asked me once if I knew about a fire that happened 5 years ago. A homestead that burned, family died. She wanted to know if Mr. Cole had acquired that land afterward. Had he? Yes, but it was a tragedy, Miss Monroe, not a crime. Lightning strike during a dry spell happens in this territory. The family's surviving relatives sold the land, and Mr. Cole bought it at a fair price. Nothing suspicious about it. Then why was Clara frightened? Mrs. Grady's hands twisted in her apron. I don't know. She wouldn't tell me the full story, just said she'd found something in the land office records, something that didn't add up. And then a few days later she was packing to leave. Eliza stood and walked to the window, her mind racing. A previous mail-order bride who'd asked too many questions about suspicious land deals, who'd found something troubling in official records, who'd left suddenly after becoming frightened. It could be innocent, a young woman who simply got cold feet about frontier life, or it could be something far darker. Mrs. Grady, you said you saw her get on the stagecoach. Did you see her leave Ridgeway? No, I was here at the house. Mr. Cole took her to town himself, said goodbye, gave her money for passage. That was the last any of us saw her. And no one thought to write to her family? To confirm she arrived safely back east? Mrs. Grady's face paled. Mr. Cole said she'd asked for privacy, that she was embarrassed about the failed engagement. He said we should respect her wishes and not contact her. The cold feeling in Eliza's chest spread through her entire body. Do you know her family's address? Where she was from specifically? I don't. Mr. Cole handled all the correspondence with the marriage broker. Mrs. Grady stood abruptly. Miss Monroe, I shouldn't have told you any of this. Mr. Cole was cleared of any wrongdoing by the territorial authorities. They investigated when Clara's family inquired about her whereabouts, and they concluded she'd simply moved on, probably to California or Oregon. These things happen. Women come west, don't like what they find, and disappear into new lives. It's not sinister. But you don't believe that. I don't know what to believe, Mrs. Grady said, her voice breaking slightly. I know Mr. Cole is a good employer. I know he's treated me fairly, but I also know Clara was frightened, and now she's gone, and sometimes late at night I wonder if we should have tried harder to help her. Before Eliza could respond, they heard horses in the yard, Nathan returning. Mrs. Grady quickly gathered the account books, clearly eager to end this conversation. Please don't tell him I told you about Clara. He made it clear we weren't to discuss her with anyone. Made it clear how? He just said it was private business and people should respect that. Nothing threatening, just firm. Mrs. Grady hurried toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, Miss Monroe, I don't think Mr. Cole would hurt anyone. I truly don't. But there are powerful people connected to his business, and sometimes powerful people do things that good men like Mr. Cole don't know about until it's too late. She left, and Eliza stood alone in the small office, her heart pounding. A previous bride who'd investigated suspicious land deals and then disappeared. Family members who'd inquired about her whereabouts. Territorial authorities who'd investigated and concluded nothing suspicious had occurred. It could all be innocent. Or it could be the most damning evidence yet that Nathan's empire was built on more than just ruthless capitalism. She needed to know the truth. Nathan appeared in the doorway, looking tired and troubled. Eliza, I'm sorry about this morning. The equipment damage was worse than we thought. Not vandalism, actually, just poor maintenance by the timber crew, but we had to deal with it before the whole operation shut down. It's fine, Eliza said, keeping her voice steady. Mrs. Grady was showing me the household accounts. Good. Are you ready to see the business side now? I promised you full transparency, and I meant it. They went to his office, a spacious room lined with file cabinets and bookshelves, dominated by a large desk covered in papers and ledgers. Nathan pulled out several account books and spread them across the desk. "This is everything," he said. "Every land purchase, every loan, every business dealing for the past 10 years. I'm not hiding anything, Eliza. Ask me whatever you want." Eliza looked at the overwhelming array of documents and realized she had no idea where to start. She wasn't an accountant or a lawyer. She couldn't parse complex business dealings or identify fraud in legal contracts, but she could ask direct questions. "Tell me about Clara Jennings." Nathan's head snapped up, his expression going carefully blank. "Where did you hear that name?" "Does it matter? Tell me about her." He was quiet for a long moment, and Eliza watched him decide how much to reveal. "Clara was a mistake," he said finally. "I sent for a bride 4 years ago, before I'd fully thought through what that meant. She arrived, seemed fine initially, but then became obsessed with investigating my business dealings. She accused me of fraud, of theft, of conspiracy. It became unbearable, so I sent her back east with generous compensation and asked her to be discreet about the situation." "And was she? Discreet?" "I have no idea. I never heard from her again." "Did her family?" Nathan's jaw tightened. "There was some confusion when her family tried to reach her. They contacted the territorial marshal, who investigated. He concluded Clara had probably moved to a different state and simply didn't want to be found. It happens. Women seeking fresh starts, escaping family pressure. The marshal closed the case. Very convenient that the marshal concluded she'd simply disappeared of her own accord." "What exactly are you suggesting, Eliza?" Nathan's voice went cold. "That I harmed her? That I made her disappear? Because if that's what you're thinking, perhaps you should leave now before you end up with the same paranoid delusions Clara suffered from." It was the first time he'd spoken to her with real anger, and Eliza felt a flutter of genuine fear, but she pushed through it. "I'm suggesting that you've been hiding things since I arrived. That every time I learned something new about your operation, it's worse than what came before. And now I discover there was another woman in my position who asked questions and then vanished, and I'm supposed to just accept that as coincidence?" Nathan moved around the desk toward her, and Eliza had to force herself not to step back. "Clara didn't vanish. She left voluntarily. Mrs. Grady saw her get on the stagecoach. Tom Fletcher was there too. Multiple witnesses. The territorial marshal investigated thoroughly and found no evidence of foul play. What more do you want?" "I want to know what she found in the land office records. What made her so frightened she had to leave?" "She found nothing, because there was nothing to find. She had conspiracy theories based on incomplete information and a tendency toward hysteria." Nathan's voice was hard. "I was patient with her as long as I could be, but eventually I realized she was never going to be satisfied. Some people can't accept that success comes from hard work and smart decisions. They need to believe there's something sinister beneath it." "Is there?" "No." Nathan held her gaze. "I've told you the truth, Eliza. I've shown you my methods. Are they aggressive? Yes. Ruthless at times? Absolutely. But criminal? No. Clara couldn't accept that, and it poisoned everything between us. I'm not interested in repeating that experience." Eliza wanted to believe him, wanted to see this as exactly what he claimed, a troubled engagement that had fallen apart because one woman couldn't handle the moral complexities of frontier capitalism. But something nagged at her, some instinct honed by years of survival in Boston's harsh social landscape. "I want to see the land office records she examined," Eliza said. "The documents about the fire property you acquired." "Why?" "So you can develop the same paranoid theories? So I can make an informed decision about whether to marry you." Eliza kept her voice level. "You promised me transparency, Nathan. You said no more secrets. Either you meant that or you didn't." They stared at each other, and Eliza could see the calculation in his eyes, weighing what he'd lose by refusing against what he might lose by agreeing. Finally, he nodded curtly. "Fine. We'll ride into Ridgeway tomorrow, visit the land office. You can examine whatever records you want. But after that, Eliza, you need to make your decision. I can't keep proving my innocence every time someone whispers suspicions. Either you trust me or you don't." "Trust is earned," Eliza said quietly, "not demanded." That evening, tension hung heavy over dinner. Nathan was withdrawn, responding to Eliza's attempts at conversation with monosyllables. Mrs. Grady served them with anxious efficiency, clearly sensing the conflict. Eliza picked at her food, her appetite gone, her mind churning with questions about Clara Jennings. After dinner, unable to sleep, Eliza wandered through the house's first floor. In the library, she ran her fingers along book spines, noticing Nathan's reading preferences: agriculture journals, legal texts, political treatises. On a lower shelf, pushed back slightly, she found something unexpected: a novel by Charles Dickens, the pages worn from reading. She pulled it out and saw an inscription on the inside cover: "To Clara, may you find adventure and romance in Montana. With love, Mother." Eliza's hands trembled. This was Clara's book. She'd brought it from home, read it here, and then supposedly left Montana without taking it with her. What woman fleeing a bad situation would leave behind a treasured gift from her mother? "You're having trouble sleeping too." Eliza spun around to find Nathan in the doorway, still dressed, holding a glass of whiskey. She quickly put the book back, but he'd seen what she was holding. "That's Clara's," he said flatly. "She left it behind. Another item on the list of evidence you're compiling against me?" "A woman fleeing wouldn't leave a gift from her mother," Eliza said. "Not unless she was planning to come back for it, or unless she couldn't take it with her." Nathan drained his whiskey in one swallow. "Or unless she wanted to leave everything connected to this place behind. Some departures are about complete breaks, Eliza. Starting fresh means leaving the past behind entirely." "Well, you sound like you're trying to convince yourself as much as me." "Maybe I am." Nathan set down his glass. "Clara's disappearance haunted me for months. I kept thinking I should have handled it differently, should have been more patient with her fears. But the marshal investigated, found nothing suspicious, and eventually I had to accept that she made her choice. Now you're here, asking the same questions, developing the same suspicions, and I'm watching history repeat itself." "Maybe that should tell you something," Eliza said. "Maybe if two different women have the same concerns, there's validity to them. Or maybe," Nathan said tiredly, "some people are predisposed to see conspiracy where there's only complexity. The frontier isn't simple, Eliza. Business here requires navigating murky waters, but murky doesn't mean murderous." He left without saying goodnight, and Eliza stood alone in the library, holding Clara's book. She carefully opened it again, looking for any notes or marks Clara might have left. Near the end of the book, she found something: a pressed flower serving as a bookmark, and beneath it faint pencil marks that might have been deliberate or might have been accidental. The marks seemed to underline certain words: truth, danger, hidden, and trust no one. Eliza's heart raced. Were these Clara's coded warnings, or was Eliza seeing patterns where none existed, just as Nathan accused? She needed those land office records, needed to see what Clara had found that made her frightened enough to leave behind her mother's gift. That night, Eliza barely slept. She kept thinking about Clara, young, blonde, delicate, arriving with hope just like Eliza had. What had she discovered? Where had she gone? And most disturbingly, had she actually left at all? Morning came with clouds rolling in from the mountains, threatening rain. Nathan was already dressed when Eliza came downstairs, his face set in determined lines. "We'll leave for Ridgeway in 20 minutes, he said. "Bring a coat. Weather's turning." The ride to town was silent and tense. Tom Fletcher accompanied them, along with two other ranch hands, which seemed excessive for a simple record search, unless Nathan expected trouble. They reached Ridgeway by mid-morning, and Nathan led Eliza directly to the land office, a small building near the general store. The clerk, a balding man named Peterson, greeted Nathan with obvious nervousness. "Mr. Cole, unexpected visit. How can I help you?" "My fiancée wants to examine the records for the Hargrove property, the homestead that burned 5 years ago." Peterson's face went carefully blank. "Of course, though I should mention those records were requested before, about 4 years ago. Another woman, I believe." "Clara Jennings," Eliza said. "I know, I want to see what she saw." Peterson glanced at Nathan, who nodded curtly. The clerk disappeared into a back room and returned with a file box. "These are the complete records for that transaction. You're welcome to review them here." Eliza sat at a small table and began going through the documents. There were property surveys, title transfers, correspondence, and reports about the fire. Everything looked routine on the surface: a tragic accident, surviving family members selling the land, Nathan purchasing it at auction. But as Eliza dug deeper, she began noticing discrepancies. The fire had been reported as a lightning strike, but the official report noted that the burn pattern was inconsistent with typical lightning fires. The investigating officer had recommended further inquiry, but no follow-up investigation appeared in the records. The surviving family members had sold quickly, receiving what seemed like a low price given the land's value. And the auction where Nathan acquired the property had attracted only 2 bidders, Nathan and another entity that withdrew its bid at the last moment. "Who was the other bidder?" Eliza asked Peterson. "I'd have to check the auction records." "Please do." Peterson disappeared again, this time returning with a ledger. He ran his finger down the page, then stopped. The competing bidder was listed as Mountain Territory Holdings. "Who owns that company?" "I don't have that information here. You'd need to check with the Territorial Commerce Office." Eliza turned to Nathan. "Do you know who owns Mountain Territory Holdings?" Nathan's jaw was tight. "It's one of Morrison's shell companies. He bids on properties occasionally to assess market value, then withdraws if the price gets too high." "Or," Eliza said slowly, "he bids to drive up the price, then withdraws so his chosen buyer gets the property, but the transaction looks competitive." "That's speculation." "Is it?" Eliza looked back at the documents. The fire investigation was incomplete. The sale price was suspiciously low. The auction had fake competition, and then you acquired valuable property at a discount. Doesn't that concern you? Even if Morrison manipulated the auction, which I'm not admitting, I still bought the property legally. The family chose to sell. I didn't force them. "Didn't you?" Eliza pulled out another document. "This is a letter from the family's lawyer expressing concern about pressure they were receiving to sell quickly. Pressure from unnamed parties who wanted the land cleared for development." Nathan's face darkened. "Where did you get that?" "It's in the file. Anyone examining these records would find it." Eliza met his eyes. "Clara found it. That's what frightened her, because this suggests the fire might not have been an accident, Nathan. It suggests someone wanted that family gone and their land available. You're making insane accusations based on incomplete information. I'm drawing conclusions based on documented evidence." Eliza's voice rose despite her effort to stay calm. "An incomplete fire investigation, suspicious pressure on survivors, manipulated auction proceedings, these aren't coincidences. Someone orchestrated this and you benefited directly. Even if someone orchestrated it, and I'm not saying they did, that doesn't make me guilty of anything except being in the right place at the right time." "Unless you knew about the orchestration," Eliza said. "Unless you were part of it." Nathan slammed his hand on the table, making everyone in the land office jump. "I was not part of any conspiracy to harm that family. I bought land that was legally available. That's all." "Then why didn't you tell me about this before? Why let me discover it like Clara did, through digging in dusty records?" "Because I knew you'd react exactly like this. I knew you'd see one ambiguous document and construct elaborate theories about murder and conspiracy, just like Clara did." Nathan's voice was harsh. She drove herself half mad with this, Eliza. She started seeing danger everywhere, suspecting everyone. She'd wake up screaming from nightmares about fires and dead families. Is that what you want? To poison your mind with unfounded paranoia? "My mind isn't the one that needs cleansing," Eliza shot back. "My conscience is clear. Can you say the same?" Before Nathan could respond, the door to the land office burst open. A woman rushed in, wild-eyed and breathless, her dress torn and muddy. Eliza recognized her vaguely from the stagecoach station, one of the townspeople who'd watched them pass. "Mr. Peterson," the woman gasped. "There's been an accident out at the old Hargrove property. They're saying—" She spotted Nathan and stopped abruptly. "What kind of accident?" Peterson asked. The woman's eyes darted between Nathan and the clerk. "They found something. Human remains, buried in the foundation of the burned house. The new owner was excavating to rebuild, and they found—" She swallowed hard. "They found bones, Mr. Peterson. The sheriff's out there now, and he's saying it might not have been just one family that died in that fire. He's saying there might have been someone else." The room went deathly silent. Eliza felt the blood drain from her face. Nathan stood frozen, his expression unreadable. Tom Fletcher's hand moved toward his pistol, then stopped. "That's impossible," Nathan said finally. The fire investigation confirmed only the Hargrove family died. Everyone else was accounted for. Well, they're finding bones that suggest otherwise, the woman said. And Sheriff Morrison, that's the old sheriff, not the nephew, he's calling for everyone connected to that property sale to come answer questions. He specifically mentioned your name, Mr. Cole. Nathan turned to Eliza, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw genuine fear in his eyes. Not the calculated concern of a man protecting his reputation, but raw terror of someone facing consequences they couldn't control. I didn't know, he said quietly. Eliza, whatever they found, I didn't know about it. Maybe you didn't, Eliza said, her voice hollow. Or maybe you knew exactly what happened and thought it would stay buried forever. Either way, we need to go out there. We need to see what they found. Miss Monroe, I don't think, Tom Fletcher started. I don't care what you think, Eliza interrupted. If there are bodies buried on property Mr. Cole acquired under suspicious circumstances, I need to know about it before I bind my life to his. We're going now. The ride out to the old Hargrove property took 40 minutes. Every one of them waited with dread. The clouds had opened, rain falling in sheets, turning the roads muddy and treacherous. By the time they arrived, Eliza was soaked through, but she barely noticed. Her entire focus was on the scene before them. The ruined foundation of the burned house was now partially excavated, revealing charred timbers and scorched stone. A group of men stood around a section of exposed earth, and even from a distance, Eliza could see what had drawn their attention, pale objects emerging from the soil that could only be bones. Sheriff Morrison, the uncle, not the nephew, was an older man with iron-gray hair and a face carved by frontier justice. He looked up as Nathan approached, his expression grim. Cole, figured you'd show up. What did you find? Nathan's voice was steady, but Eliza could hear the strain beneath it. Partial skeleton, buried beneath the foundation. Female, based on the hip structure. Young adult, been here about 5 years, maybe more. The sheriff gestured to a younger man kneeling by the excavation. Doc Reynolds is examining the remains now, but preliminary assessment suggests this person died violently. Blunt force trauma to the skull. Eliza felt sick. Could it be one of the Hargrove family? Maybe someone missed in the initial investigation. Hargrove family was accounted for. Father, mother, 2 boys. This is a woman, miss. The sheriff's eyes were sharp. You're Cole's new fiancée, I hear. Might want to reconsider that arrangement given present circumstances. Do you have any idea who she is? Nathan asked. Not yet, but I'm going to find out. The sheriff moved closer, his voice dropping. I'm also going to investigate how someone ended up buried under a house that conveniently burned 5 years ago on property you conveniently acquired afterward. That seems like quite a coincidence, doesn't it, Cole? I had nothing to do with this fire or these deaths. Maybe not directly, but your business partner Morrison sure seems to benefit from a lot of convenient tragedies. The sheriff's eyes hardened. I couldn't prove anything 4 years ago when that Jennings girl disappeared, but I always had my suspicions. Now we got bones turning up on your property, and I'm starting to think maybe I should have pressed harder back then. Eliza's vision swam. You investigated Clara's disappearance? Briefly. Girl vanished after asking too many questions about Cole's business dealings. Family said she'd been writing letters home about suspicious land transactions, about fires and forced sales. Then suddenly she's on a stagecoach heading east, and no one ever hears from her again. The sheriff looked at Eliza meaningfully. Except the family never got any letters from California or Oregon like they expected. And when they hired a Pinkerton agent to trace her movements, the trail went cold right here in Ridgeway. Nathan's face had gone ashen. You never told me about a Pinkerton investigation. Didn't seem relevant at the time. Pinkerton couldn't find evidence of foul play, just evidence that Miss Jennings vanished more completely than a woman voluntarily relocating usually does. The sheriff gestured to the bones. But now we got a dead woman in the ground, and I'm starting to wonder if maybe Miss Jennings didn't make it onto that stagecoach after all. Maybe she ended up like this poor soul, buried and forgotten until someone started digging. That's impossible, Nathan said, but his voice lacked conviction. Mrs. Grady saw Clara get on the stagecoach. Tom Fletcher, too. She left. Witnesses can be mistaken, the sheriff said, or they can be lying. I'll be interviewing both of them again, more thoroughly this time. Eliza couldn't breathe. The rain pounded down. The excavation site looked like an open grave, and the man she'd been planning to marry in 3 days stood accused of being connected to murder and disappearance. Everything was collapsing around her, all the careful justifications and moral compromises crumbling in the face of actual bones pulled from actual earth. "I need to leave," she said suddenly. "I need to leave right now." "Miss Monroe." Nathan reached for her arm. "Don't touch me." Eliza jerked away from him. "Don't you dare touch me. If there's any chance, any possibility, that you know what happened to Clara, that you were involved in whatever conspiracy led to this woman's death," her voice broke. "I won't be another victim. I won't be another woman who asked too many questions and ended up buried in the ground. You're not a victim, Eliza, and neither was Clara. She left. She's alive somewhere, and these bones belong to someone else entirely." Nathan's desperation was palpable. "You have to believe me." "I don't have to believe anything." Eliza turned to the sheriff. "Can you arrange safe passage for me back to Ridgeway? I don't feel safe returning with Mr. Cole." "Of course, miss. My deputy will escort you." The sheriff signaled to a younger man. "And Miss Monroe, I'd appreciate if you'd stay in town for a few days. I may have questions for you about what you've observed at the Cole Ranch." As the deputy led her toward his horse, Eliza heard Nathan calling her name, but she didn't turn around. Couldn't turn around. Because if she looked at him now, she might see something in his face that would make everything worse. Guilt, or worse, the cold calculation of a man deciding whether she knew too much to be allowed to leave. The ride back to Ridgeway was a blur. The deputy tried making conversation, but Eliza couldn't focus, couldn't think beyond the immediate reality. Bones in the ground, a missing woman who'd asked the same questions Eliza had been asking, and a web of suspicious land deals stretching back years. In Ridgeway, the deputy took her to a small boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Patterson. Within an hour, Eliza was installed in a modest but clean room, her few possessions brought from the Cole Ranch by a sympathetic Tom Fletcher who wouldn't meet her eyes. "Miss Monroe," Tom said quietly as he set down her carpet bag, "whatever you're thinking about Mr. Cole, I want you to know, I've worked for him 8 years, and I've never seen him hurt anyone. He's tough, yeah, and he plays hardball in business. But murder? That's not who he is." "How would you know?" Eliza asked tiredly. "How would any of us know what someone's capable of when they're desperate enough or threatened enough?" Tom had no answer for that. He left, and Eliza was alone with her thoughts and her terror, and the slowly solidifying certainty that she'd narrowly escaped something terrible. But she'd also left behind questions that needed answers. Who was the woman buried under the Hargrove house? What had really happened to Clara Jennings? And how deep did the conspiracy go? Was Nathan an innocent dupe, a knowing participant, or something in between? As night fell over Ridgeway, Eliza sat by her window and watched rain stream down the glass. Somewhere out there, Nathan was being questioned by the sheriff. Somewhere, Morrison's political machine was calculating damage control. And somewhere, possibly, Clara Jennings was either living a quiet life under a new name or lying in an unmarked grave, another casualty of Montana Territory's brutal march toward prosperity. Eliza had come west believing she was marrying a wheat farmer. She'd discovered an empire built on ruthless ambition. And now she'd stumbled into something darker still: murder, conspiracy, and the terrifying possibility that the woman she might have become had already died and been buried, her questions silenced forever. The wedding was supposed to be in 3 days. Instead, Eliza would be testifying to the territorial authorities, helping piece together a mystery that might finally expose the rot beneath Montana's glittering surface of progress and expansion. She'd wanted to understand what she was walking into. Now she understood perfectly, and the truth was more horrifying than any careful omission Nathan had constructed. Because the lie wasn't just that he was richer than he'd claimed, or more ruthless, or more politically connected. The lie was that any of it was survivable, that a woman could navigate this world without becoming its victim, that practical compromises didn't eventually lead to complicity in things too dark to justify. Clara Jennings had learned that truth, and she'd paid for it with her life, or at least her freedom. Eliza had learned it too, but she'd learned it just in time to escape. She hoped. The rain continued through the night, drumming against the boarding house windows like insistent fingers demanding entry. Eliza lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind refusing to settle. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw those bones emerging from the earth, pale and accusing. Every shadow in the room seemed to take the shape of Clara Jennings, the woman who'd stood where Eliza now stood, who'd asked the same questions and then vanished into silence. Morning came gray and cold. Mrs. Patterson brought breakfast on a tray, eggs, toast, weak coffee, and hovered anxiously in the doorway. "You barely touched your supper last night, dear. You need to eat something." "Thank you," Eliza managed, though food was the last thing she wanted. "There's talk all over town about what they found at the Hargrove place," Mrs. Patterson said, unable to contain her curiosity. "They're saying Mr. Cole might be arrested. They're saying all sorts of things about his business dealings, about people who've disappeared or died suspiciously. Is it true you were supposed to marry him?" "Yes." "Well," Mrs. Patterson smoothed her apron nervously, "I suppose you're fortunate you discovered the truth in time. Though I must say, I never would have suspected Mr. Cole of anything so terrible. He always seemed like such a gentleman." After the landlady left, Eliza forced herself to eat a few bites. She was dressing when a knock came at her door, the sheriff's deputy from yesterday, looking uncomfortable. "Miss Monroe, Sheriff Morrison would like to speak with you. There's been developments overnight." Eliza's heart sank. "What kind of developments?" "Best if the sheriff explains, ma'am, if you'll come with me." The sheriff's office was a small building near the land office, smelling of tobacco smoke and old coffee. Sheriff Morrison sat behind a battered desk covered in papers, looking like he hadn't slept. He gestured Eliza to a chair. "Miss Monroe, thank you for coming. I have some questions, but first, I need to tell you what we've learned." He pulled out a file. "The remains we found yesterday have been preliminarily identified. The woman was approximately 20 to 25 years old, buried for approximately 4 to 6 years. That time frame predates Clara Jennings' disappearance by at least a year." Eliza felt a confusing mix of relief and horror. "So it's not Clara?" "Doesn't appear to be, no. We're still working on positive identification, but based on dental records and jewelry found with the body, we believe the victim is Sarah Whitmore, daughter of Robert Whitmore, a homesteader who died in the same fire that killed the Hargrove family." "I thought the Hargrove family was the only casualty." "So did we. But it turns out Sarah Whitmore was visiting the Hargroves that night. She'd been courting the oldest Hargrove boy. Her father reported her missing after the fire, assumed she'd died in the blaze. We searched the ruins but never found her remains, figured they'd burned completely. Now we know why we didn't find her. She wasn't in the fire. She was buried under the foundation before the fire started." The implications made Eliza feel sick. Someone killed her and hid her body, then burned the house to cover it up? That's what the evidence suggests. The skull fracture happened before the fire. There's no fire damage to the bone in that area. Someone hit her hard enough to crack her skull, buried her in a shallow grave under the foundation, then set fire to the house. The Hargroves likely died from the fire, making it look like a tragic accident while actually being murder and arson. Who would do such a thing? That's what I'm trying to determine. The sheriff leaned back in his chair. "Here's what troubles me, Miss Monroe. Robert Whitmore owned the land adjacent to the Hargrove property. After his daughter disappeared and the neighboring family died, he was devastated. Within 6 months, he sold his land for a fraction of its value and left Montana Territory. That land was purchased by Charles Morrison," Eliza finished quietly. "Through a shell company, yes. And shortly thereafter, Morrison sold it to Nathan Cole at a significant markup, though still below market value. So someone orchestrated a fire that killed a family, concealed a murder, drove a grieving father to sell his land at a loss, and ultimately benefited Cole and Morrison's expansion plans." Eliza's hands were shaking. "Are you saying Nathan was involved in planning this?" "I'm saying the pattern is suspicious. Cole benefits directly from a tragedy that was actually murder. Either he was involved in planning it, or he was a convenient buyer who Morrison used to launder the acquired property." The sheriff's expression was grave. "There's a third possibility, too, that Cole knew nothing, but Morrison orchestrated everything and simply made sure Cole was positioned to buy the land afterward. In that scenario, Cole's guilt would be in benefiting from murder, not ordering it." "Have you questioned Morrison?" "Trying to. He's in Helena, conveniently away from Ridgeway when all this comes to light. His lawyers are claiming he's cooperating fully, but they're also fighting every attempt to access his business records. The sheriff rubbed his face tiredly. Men like Morrison don't get to where they are without learning how to insulate themselves from consequences. Even if he ordered that fire, proving it will be nearly impossible. What about Nathan? Have you arrested him? Not yet. We've questioned him extensively, and his story is consistent. He knew nothing about the fire being arson, nothing about Sarah Whitmore's murder, nothing about Morrison's involvement beyond standard business dealings. He claims he bought land that was legitimately available and had no reason to question its provenance. Do you believe him? The sheriff was quiet for a moment. I believe he's telling part of the truth. Whether it's all of the truth, I can't say yet. That's partly why I wanted to speak with you, Miss Monroe. You've spent time at the Cole Ranch, observed the operation. Have you seen or heard anything that suggests Cole was aware of criminal activity? Eliza thought carefully. She wanted to condemn Nathan, wanted to believe he was complicit in everything Morrison had done. It would make her decision to leave simple, justified, but honesty compelled her to be fair. I saw a ruthless businessman, she said slowly, someone who bought debt to acquire land, who manipulated auctions, who used his connections to Morrison for access to capital and political influence, but I never saw evidence that he knew about murder or arson. Mrs. Grady, his housekeeper, said he's always been fair to his employees. Tom Fletcher, his foreman, insists Cole wouldn't hurt anyone. And Clara Jennings? Did you learn anything about her disappearance? Only that she asked the same questions I did about suspicious land deals, that she became frightened and left suddenly. Mrs. Grady saw her get on a stagecoach, as did Tom Fletcher. Multiple witnesses confirmed she departed Ridgeway. But never arrived anywhere, the sheriff said. That's what troubles me. The Pinkerton agent traced her to the Ridgeway station, confirmed she boarded the eastbound stage. But when that stage reached its next stop, Claire Jennings wasn't on it. Somewhere between Ridgeway and Helena, she vanished. Eliza felt cold. Could she have gotten off at one of the way stations? We checked. No one matching her description was seen at any of the stops. It's like she disappeared between one town and the next. The sheriff's expression was grim. Miss Monroe, I need to ask you directly. Has anyone threatened you? Made you feel unsafe? Suggested you should leave town or stop asking questions? Nathan tried to discourage my investigation into Clara and the land deals, but it felt more like embarrassment than threat. He said Clara had become paranoid, that her conspiracy theories had poisoned their relationship. Eliza paused. But Sheriff, I think there's something you should know. Last night at the boarding house, someone slipped a note under my door. She pulled the crumpled paper from her pocket. She'd found it around midnight, noticed it when she got up to check the door lock for the third time. The message was brief, written in crude block letters. Leave Montana or end up like the others. The sheriff took the note carefully, his jaw tightening. Did you see who delivered it? No, I heard footsteps in the hallway, but by the time I opened the door, whoever it was had gone. This changes things. The sheriff stood and called to his deputy. Jenkins, I want a guard posted at Mrs. Patterson's boarding house. No one approaches Miss Monroe without being vetted first. He turned back to Eliza. I'm also going to recommend you testify before the territorial prosecutor when he arrives. Your observations about the Cole operation, combined with this threat, suggest there's more going on than just one isolated murder. When does the prosecutor arrive? Tomorrow morning. He's been investigating Morrison's business dealings for months. Corruption, bribery, fraudulent land transactions. The discovery of Sarah Whitmore's body may be the evidence he needs to finally build a criminal case. The sheriff's expression became intent. But Miss Monroe, you need to understand what you're walking into. If you testify, if you provide information that helps prosecute Morrison and anyone connected to him, you'll be making powerful enemies. Men with money and influence who won't hesitate to silence witnesses they consider dangerous. Like they silenced Sarah Whitmore? Like they may have silenced Clara Jennings? Exactly like that. Eliza thought of the note, the crude threat that had kept her awake for hours. She thought of Clara's book left behind in Nathan's library, of bones emerging from earth, of a pattern of convenient tragedies that had built an empire. She thought of her own fear, her desperate need for safety. the $3 that had brought her to Montana in search of survival through marriage. "I'll testify," she said. "Whatever I saw, whatever I know, I'll tell the prosecutor everything." The sheriff nodded approvingly. "That takes courage, Miss Monroe. Real courage. I'll make sure you're protected." As Eliza left the sheriff's office with a deputy escort, she saw a crowd gathered outside the land office. News had spread about the murder investigation, and Ridgway was buzzing with speculation and outrage. She heard fragments of conversation as she passed. "Always knew Cole was too successful too fast. Morrison's been buying up half the territory through murder and intimidation. About time someone investigated the bastards. What about that Jennings girl? You think they killed her too?" Back at the boarding house, Eliza found Mrs. Patterson in a state of agitation. "Miss Monroe, you had a visitor while you were gone. Mr. Cole. I told him you weren't receiving visitors, but he left this letter for you." Eliza took the sealed envelope with trembling hands. Part of her wanted to burn it unread, wanted nothing more to do with Nathan Cole and his compromised empire. But she needed to know what he'd say, how he'd try to explain or justify or threaten. She opened the letter in her room, the deputy standing guard outside her door. "Eliza, I understand why you left. I understand why you believe I'm complicit in Morrison's crimes. If our positions were reversed, I would likely think the same. But I need you to know the truth, even if you never speak to me again. I did not know about Sarah Whitmore's murder. I did not know the fire was arson. When I purchased that land, I believed I was buying legitimately available property from families who'd chosen to sell after a tragic accident. Morrison told me he'd negotiated fair prices, that the families were eager to leave Montana after their losses. I had no reason to question him. Was I naive? Yes. Was I willfully blind to the possibility that Morrison's methods might be corrupt? Perhaps. I wanted to believe that my success came from smart decisions and hard work, not from being a pawn in someone else's criminal enterprise. That belief may have made me careless about asking difficult questions. Regarding Clara Jennings, I swear to you, I saw her board that stagecoach. Mrs. Grady and Tom Fletcher saw it too. Whatever happened to her after she left Ridgway, I had no part in it and no knowledge of it. The fact that she disappeared between towns terrifies me because it suggests Morrison's reach is longer than I ever imagined. It suggests that asking the wrong questions can be fatal, even after you think you've escaped. You are in danger, Eliza. The note you received was not an idle threat. Morrison knows you've been investigating, knows you've made connections between the land deals and the murders. If you testify against him, he will try to discredit you, intimidate you, or worse. Please consider leaving Montana Territory entirely. I will pay for your passage anywhere you want to go, provide you with enough money to start fresh somewhere safe. This is not a bribe for your silence. Testify if you must. But I'm begging you to do it from a distance where Morrison can't reach you. I know I have no right to ask for your trust after everything you've discovered, but I'm asking anyway. Trust that I never wanted anyone hurt. Trust that I'm as horrified by these revelations as you are. And trust that I will do everything in my power to ensure Morrison faces justice, even if it costs me my own freedom. Whatever you decide, please stay safe. You came to Montana believing you were marrying a wheat farmer, and instead you stumbled into a nightmare. I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry for all of it. Nathan Eliza read the letter twice, searching for deception or manipulation, finding only what seemed like genuine remorse and fear. But could she trust it? Could she trust anything Nathan Cole said after everything she'd learned? A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. The deputy's voice. "Miss Monroe, there's a gentleman here to see you. Says he's a federal marshal from Helena." Eliza opened the door to find a tall man in his 40s, wearing a marshal's badge and carrying himself with quiet authority. "Miss Monroe, I'm Marshal William Garrett. I've been working with the territorial prosecutor on the Morrison investigation. I understand you've agreed to provide testimony." "Yes?" "Good. I need to brief you on what we know and what we need from you." He glanced at the deputy. "This conversation needs to be private. Can we use the parlor downstairs?" Mrs. Patterson cleared the boarding house parlor for them, and Marshal Garrett spread papers across the table. "Miss Monroe, what I'm about to tell you is confidential. The information cannot leave this room until the prosecutor decides to file charges." "Understood?" Yes. Charles Morrison has been under federal investigation for 18 months. We have evidence of bribery, corruption, fraudulent land transactions, and conspiracy to defraud the government regarding territorial development contracts. What we haven't had is evidence connecting him to violent crimes. The discovery of Sarah Whitmore's body changes that. He pulled out a thick file. We believe Morrison has orchestrated at least 6 suspicious deaths over the past decade. Deaths that conveniently cleared land for his acquisition or eliminated people who threatened his business interests. We've never been able to prove it because Morrison is careful. He uses intermediaries, shells companies, and plausible deniability. He never personally commits violence, never even directly orders it. Instead, he creates situations where violent outcomes serve his interests and then relies on associates to understand what's needed without explicit instruction. That's how organized criminals operate, Eliza said. Exactly. Morrison runs his empire like a crime syndicate while maintaining the appearance of a legitimate businessman. And he's been remarkably successful at it because he's protected by political connections, including the territorial governor and several judges. Then how do you expect to prosecute him? By building an overwhelming case that his political allies can't ignore or suppress. We need multiple witnesses willing to testify about his methods, his threats, his pattern of behavior. We need documentation showing the connections between his business dealings and suspicious deaths. And we need someone who can speak credibly about life inside the coal operation, how Morrison's influence worked in practice, what Nathan Cole knew or should have known, how the empire was actually built. Eliza understood what he was asking. You want me to testify against Nathan as well as Morrison. We want you to testify truthfully about what you observed. If that testimony implicates Nathan Cole in criminal activity, so be it. If it exonerates him, that's fine too. What matters is that you tell the truth about what you saw and heard during your time at the ranch. Nathan claims he didn't know about the murders, that he was Morrison's unwitting tool rather than his conscious accomplice. That may be true, Marshall Garrett said, or it may be a convenient fiction. Either way, the prosecutor will determine Cole's culpability based on all the evidence, not just his own claims of ignorance. Your observations will be crucial in making that determination. He pulled out another document. I also need to discuss Clara Jennings with you. We've reopened the investigation into her disappearance based on new information. The stagecoach she supposedly boarded made its usual stops between Ridgeway and Helena. We've interviewed everyone who was on that stage, passengers, drivers, station managers. None of them remember seeing a young blonde woman matching Clara's description. Eliza's stomach dropped. But Nathan said he saw her board, Mrs. Grady and Tom Fletcher confirmed it. They confirmed seeing her at the station. They confirmed seeing her approach the stagecoach. But did any of them actually see her get inside and depart? We're questioning that now. The marshal's expression was grave. Miss Monroe, we think Clara Jennings never left Ridgeway. We think she was intercepted before boarding, taken somewhere, and killed. And we think her body is buried somewhere on Morrison's extensive land holdings. Why would Morrison kill her? She was leaving voluntarily. Was she? Marshall Garrett pulled out a letter, handling it carefully. This is from Clara's personal correspondence, recovered from her family's home. It was written 3 days before she supposedly left Montana. In it, she tells her mother that she's discovered evidence of multiple murders connected to Morrison's land acquisitions. She says she's gathering documentation to take to federal authorities. She says she knows it's dangerous, but she can't stay silent about what she's learned. He let Eliza read the letter, Clara's careful handwriting describing in detail the suspicious deaths, the incomplete investigations, the pattern of convenient tragedies. It was damning evidence, not just of Morrison's crimes, but of Clara's determination to expose them. That doesn't sound like a woman planning to quietly leave and start over, Eliza said. No, it sounds like a woman planning to become a federal witness. We think Morrison discovered her intentions, possibly through an informant at the coal ranch, and decided she was too dangerous to let leave. The boarding of the stagecoach was theater, witnessed by people who could later confirm she departed. But somewhere between the station and the stage's actual departure, she was taken. Who would have taken her? That's what we're trying to determine. Morrison has several men in his employ who specialize in handling problems discreetly. We have suspects but no evidence. What we do know is that Clara Jennings had information that could have destroyed Morrison 4 years ago. Now you have similar information, which means you're in similar danger. Eliza felt the weight of that danger settling over her like a physical thing. The note I received, you think that was from Morrison's people? Almost certainly. It's their standard method of intimidation. They threaten, they watch to see if the threat works, and if it doesn't, they escalate. You've already proven you won't be easily frightened by refusing to leave town. That makes you dangerous to them. What should I do? Testify, then leave Montana under federal protection. We can arrange new identity, safe relocation, everything you need to start over somewhere Morrison can't reach you. Marshal Garrett leaned forward intently. Miss Monroe, I won't lie to you. If you testify against Charles Morrison, your life in Montana Territory is over. He has too much influence, too many connections. Even if we successfully prosecute him, his associates will remain, and they'll remember who helped put him away. You'll never be safe here. And if I don't testify? Morrison will probably leave you alone, assuming your silence means you're not a threat. You could stay in Montana, build a quiet life somewhere far from Ridgeway, maybe even marry eventually. But you'll live knowing you let a murder continue operating, knowing that other women might die because you chose safety over justice. It was the choice Eliza had been avoiding since she discovered Sarah Whitmore's bones. Safety or justice. Silence or truth. Survival or conscience. She thought of Clara Jennings, who'd chosen justice and paid with her life. She thought of Sarah Whitmore, whose body had lain hidden for years while her father died thinking his daughter had simply burned in an accident. She thought of all the other victims, displaced families, murdered rivals, women who'd asked too many questions. I'll testify, Eliza said firmly, and afterward I'll accept federal protection and relocation. I came to Montana looking for survival, but I won't survive through complicity and murder. Whatever it costs me, I'll tell the truth. Marshal Garrett nodded approvingly. The prosecutor arrives tomorrow morning. We'll take your formal statement then, and we'll begin building the case. In the meantime, you'll have armed guards at all times. Don't go anywhere alone. Don't accept food or drink from anyone we haven't vetted. And if you see anything suspicious, alert the guards immediately. The rest of the day passed in anxious waiting. Eliza stayed in her room, watching through the window as deputies took up positions around the boarding house. She saw townspeople gathering in the street, their conversations animated, clearly discussing the scandal unfolding in their midst. She saw riders coming and going from the sheriff's office, carrying messages and documents. And once, she saw a familiar figure on horseback, Tom Fletcher, watching the boarding house from a distance before riding away. That evening, Mrs. Patterson brought dinner on a tray, the deputy carefully inspecting it first before allowing it through. I still can't believe Mr. Cole is mixed up in murder, the landlady said, shaking her head. He always seemed so respectable. Respectability and morality aren't the same thing, Eliza said quietly. After dark, lying in bed and listening to the deputy pacing in the hallway, Eliza finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of what was happening. In less than a week, she'd gone from a desperate seamstress seeking survival through marriage to a federal witness preparing to testify against one of Montana Territory's most powerful men. She'd discovered an empire built on blood, uncovered murders that had been carefully concealed, and chosen to speak truth, even though it meant destroying any chance of the secure future she'd come west to find. She thought of Nathan's letter, his claims of innocence and ignorance. She wanted to believe him, wanted to think he'd been Morrison's unwitting tool rather than his conscious accomplice. But whether he'd known about the murders or simply benefited from them while deliberately not asking questions, the result was the same. He'd built his empire on foundation of other people's suffering, and Eliza refused to become part of that foundation. Morning came with cold sunshine and nervous energy. Marshal Garrett arrived early with the territorial prosecutor, a sharp-eyed man named Edmund Blackwood, who had the look of someone who'd spent years fighting corruption in impossible circumstances. Miss Monroe, Blackwood said, settling into the boarding house parlor with files and notebooks. Thank you for your courage. Let's begin with how you came to Montana Territory and what you observed during your time at the Cole Ranch. For 3 hours, Eliza told her story. She described Nathan's deceptive letters, her arrival at the estate, the confrontation with the Hendricks family, her investigation into Clara Jennings, and finally, the discovery of the land office documents that revealed suspicious patterns. She described every conversation with Nathan, every attempt he'd made to discourage her questions, every inconsistency she'd noticed. Blackwood took meticulous notes, occasionally asking for clarification or specific details. Did Nathan Cole ever explicitly admit knowing about Morrison's criminal activities? No, he always maintained he'd operated legally, that any suspicious circumstances were coincidental or beyond his knowledge. But did his behavior suggest consciousness of guilt? Did he act like someone trying to conceal criminal activity? Eliza considered carefully. He acted like someone trying to conceal morally questionable business practices. Whether that crossed into actual criminality, I couldn't determine. He was defensive about his methods, embarrassed by some of the details, but I never saw evidence of actual malice or intent to harm. That's an honest answer, Blackwood said. It may actually help Cole's defense if we end up charging him. Intent matters in criminal cases. Are you planning to charge him? We're still determining that. Cole's culpability depends partly on what he knew and when he knew it. If he genuinely believed Morrison's land acquisitions were legitimate, if he had no knowledge of the murders, then his crime is negligence and willful blindness rather than conspiracy. Those carry different penalties. Marshal Garrett added, "We're also investigating whether Cole might be willing to cooperate with the prosecution. If he testifies against Morrison, provides documentation of their business relationship, that could be valuable enough to warrant immunity or reduce charges." The idea of Nathan testifying surprised Eliza. Would he do that? Betray Morrison after everything Morrison did for him? If the alternative is prison? Possibly, Blackwood said. Men like Cole often believe their own rationalizations until forced to confront consequences. Sometimes that confrontation produces cooperation. They finished taking Eliza's statement by early afternoon. Blackwood assembled the documents carefully, his expression satisfied. "This is good testimony, Miss Monroe. Credible, detailed, and damning to Morrison's operation. Combined with the physical evidence from the Whitmore murder and the documentation we've gathered about fraudulent land deals, we should be able to indict Morrison and several of his associates within the week." And then what happens? Then we arrest them, begin the trial, and hope the territorial governor doesn't interfere. Morrison has powerful friends who'll fight to protect him, but we have federal jurisdiction, which limits their ability to simply make charges disappear. Blackwood's expression was grim. "It won't be easy, Miss Monroe. Men like Morrison don't go down without fighting dirty. Expect witness intimidation, character assassination, possibly violence against anyone who threatens his freedom. Which is why we're relocating you as soon as the indictment is filed," Marshal Garrett said. "Within 24 hours of Morrison's arrest, you'll be on a train east under assumed identity with federal escort. We'll establish you somewhere Morrison's influence doesn't reach, probably Chicago or Philadelphia, somewhere with enough people that you can disappear into anonymity." Eliza tried to imagine that life, new name, new city, complete severance from everything Montana had represented. It should have felt like loss, but instead it felt like liberation. She'd come west seeking survival through dependence on a man. She'd leave having chosen independence and truth, even at enormous cost. "When do you expect to make arrests?" she asked. 2 days, Blackwood said. "We're coordinating with federal marshals to arrest Morrison simultaneously with several of his key associates. We don't want to give anyone time to flee or destroy evidence. The moment Morrison is in custody, we'll move you out of Ridgeway." That afternoon, as Eliza packed her few belongings in preparation for departure, another visitor requested to see her. The deputy consulted with Marshal Garrett, then reported back. "It's Mrs. Grady from the Cole Ranch. She says she has information about Clara Jennings she needs to share. The marshal says you can see her if you want, but you don't have to." Eliza considered refusing, but curiosity won out. "I'll see her." Mrs. Grady entered the parlor looking older than Eliza remembered, her face drawn with stress and fear. She sat heavily in the offered chair, her hands twisting her apron. "Miss Monroe, I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you from the start, but I was frightened." The older woman's voice shook. "It's about Clara, about what really happened the day she left." Eliza felt her pulse quicken. "Go on." "Mr. Cole did take Clara to the stagecoach station. Tom Fletcher and I both saw it. We rode into town with them. Clara got out of the wagon, carrying her bag, and walked toward the stage. Mr. Cole said goodbye, gave her money, and we all watched her approach the coach. Mrs. Grady paused, tears forming in her eyes. But Miss Monroe, I saw something else. Something I didn't understand at the time, but it's haunted me ever since. What did you see? There was another man at the station, someone I didn't recognize, dressed like a ranch hand but wearing better boots than most hands can afford. He was standing near the stage, and when Clara approached, he stepped in front of her. They spoke briefly, and I saw Clara's face change. She looked frightened. Then the man gestured toward the hotel across the street, like he wanted her to go with him. Clara looked back at us, at Mr. Cole, and her face. Mrs. Grady wiped her eyes. She looked terrified, Miss Monroe, but she went with the man anyway. Did you tell Nathan? Did you say anything about this? I tried. I said, Mr. Cole, that man stopped Miss Jennings. Should we check on her? But Mr. Cole said not to worry, that Clara had probably run into an acquaintance, that she'd board the stage when she was ready. We waited 15 minutes, and when the stage prepared to depart and Clara hadn't returned, Mr. Cole said she must have changed her mind, that she'd probably decided to stay in town for a few days before leaving. We went back to the ranch, and later Mr. Cole said Clara had taken a different stage a few days later. I believed him. But she never took another stage. No. Mrs. Grady's voice broke. I think that man intercepted her. I think he was sent to prevent her from leaving, and I think Mr. Cole knew it was going to happen. That's why he wasn't concerned when she didn't board. That's why he made sure Tom and I were witnesses to her departure, but didn't let us actually see her leave town. The implications were staggering. If Mrs. Grady was right, Nathan had deliberately orchestrated Clara's apparent departure as cover for her actual abduction or murder. He hadn't just been ignorant of Morrison's crimes. He'd actively participated in eliminating a witness. Why are you telling me this now? Eliza asked. Because I can't live with it anymore. Because when they found Sarah Whitmore's body, I realized Clara might be buried somewhere too. Another woman who asked too many questions and died for it. And because you're alive, Miss Monroe, and I don't want your death on my conscience as well. Mrs. Grady gripped Eliza's hands. They'll kill me for telling you this. Mr. Cole will know it came from me, but it's worth it if it helps bring justice for Clara and Sarah and whoever else Morrison has murdered. Marshal Garrett, who'd been listening from the doorway, stepped forward. Mrs. Grady, I need you to make a formal statement. Everything you just told Miss Monroe. We need it documented officially. Will you protect her? Eliza demanded. If Nathan and Morrison realize she's testified against them, she'll have the same protection you're getting, federal custody, relocation, new identity if necessary. Garrett helped Mrs. Grady to her feet. You're doing the right thing, ma'am. It takes courage to speak truth against powerful men. After Mrs. Grady was taken to give her statement, Eliza sat alone in the parlor, processing this new information. Nathan hadn't just been Morrison's unwitting tool. He'd actively helped eliminate Clara Jennings, had orchestrated her apparent departure to conceal her actual fate. The man who'd written letters about honesty and simple truths was a murderer's accomplice, consciously complicit in silencing a woman who threatened his empire. She thought of his letter, his claims of innocence and horror at the revelations. All lies. Careful manipulations designed to preserve his freedom and maintain plausible deniability. He tried the same tactics with her that had worked with Clara: deflection, discouragement of questions, promises of transparency that never materialized. The only difference was that Eliza had escaped before the same fate befell her. That evening, as the sun set over Ridgeway and guards took up night positions around the boarding house, Prosecutor Blackwood came to brief Eliza on the plan. Mrs. Grady's testimony changes everything. We now have direct evidence of Nathan Cole's involvement in Clara Jennings' disappearance. That's conspiracy to kidnap at minimum, possibly conspiracy to murder depending on what happened after the interception. We'll be arresting Cole simultaneously with Morrison the day after tomorrow. Will you find Clara's body? We're organizing search teams to examine Morrison's properties, especially areas near where the Whitmore girl was found. If Clara's buried somewhere on Morrison's land, we'll find her. Blackwood's expression was determined. These men have operated with impunity for too long, Miss Monroe. They've murdered and stolen and corrupted Montana Territory's development for their own profit. But you and Mrs. Grady, by choosing truth over safety, are finally bringing them to justice. That's something to be proud of. Eliza didn't feel proud. She felt exhausted, frightened, and desperately sad for Clara Jennings, whose courage had cost her everything, while Eliza's similar courage had merely cost her the illusion of security. The next day passed in tense waiting. Eliza stayed in her room, reading Clara's book that she'd brought with her from the ranch, finding comfort in the familiar story, even as she mourned the woman who'd read it before her. At one point, she noticed something she'd missed before. A pressed flower serving as a bookmark had been placed on a specific page, and when Eliza read that page carefully, she found Clara had underlined certain letters throughout the text. Pieced together, they spelled out, "Morrison ordered fire." Clara had known. She'd found evidence, documented it in code, and tried to take that evidence to federal authorities. And she'd been stopped before she could testify, silenced permanently by men who couldn't allow the truth to emerge. But the truth was emerging now, 4 years late but finally unstoppable. Clara's death wouldn't be in vain. Sarah Whitmore's murder wouldn't remain hidden, and the empire built on their graves would finally collapse. Evening brought news from Marshal Garrett. "Everything's in place. Tomorrow morning at dawn, we arrest Morrison in Helena, Cole at his ranch, and 8 associates across the territory. By noon, they'll all be in federal custody, and you'll be on a train east under armed escort. Pack tonight, Miss Monroe. Tomorrow, your life in Montana ends, but your freedom begins." Eliza packed her small bag, including Clara's book as evidence and remembrance. She thought about the woman she'd been when she arrived in Montana, desperate, dependent, willing to marry a stranger for survival. She thought about the woman she'd become, someone who'd chosen truth over safety, justice over security, conscience over convenience. The cost had been enormous. She'd lost the chance at the secure future she'd come west to find. She'd lost her name, her identity, everything familiar. But she'd gained something perhaps more valuable: self-respect, autonomy, and the knowledge that when faced with an impossible choice, she'd chosen rightly. As she lay down to sleep for her last night in Montana territory, Eliza thought of Clara Jennings one final time. They'd never met, but they were connected by courage, by curiosity, by refusal to accept comfortable lies when uncomfortable truths demanded acknowledgement. "I'll make sure they remember you," Eliza whispered into the darkness. "I'll make sure your death matters, that it leads to justice for everyone Morrison destroyed. That's my promise to you, Clara. Your silence ends tomorrow." And with that promise made, Eliza finally slept, knowing that morning would bring both ending and beginning, the death of who she'd been and the birth of who she'd chosen to become. Dawn came soft and gray, mist rising from the streets of Ridgeway like ghosts reluctant to leave. Eliza woke before the sun fully cleared the mountains, her packed bag sitting by the door like a patient companion waiting for departure. She dressed carefully in her traveling clothes, the same dress she'd worn when she arrived, though it felt like a lifetime ago rather than just 2 weeks. The woman who'd stepped off that stagecoach, desperate and hopeful, seemed like a stranger now, someone Eliza barely recognized. Marshal Garrett arrived before 6, his face tense with the controlled energy of a man about to execute a carefully planned operation. "The teams are in position. Morrison's being arrested in Helena as we speak. Federal marshals are surrounding Cole's ranch right now. Within the hour, this will be over." "And then I leave?" "Then you leave. Train departs at 8. We'll have you in Helena by afternoon, and from there you'll travel east under assumed identity with 2 marshals as escorts. By tomorrow night, you'll be in Chicago, and Montana territory will be behind you forever." Eliza nodded, but her stomach churned with anxiety. So much could go wrong. Morrison could be tipped off and flee. Nathan could resist arrest. Violence could erupt. The next few hours would determine whether justice would finally be served or whether powerful men would escape consequences once again. Mrs. Patterson brought coffee and breakfast that Eliza couldn't eat. The landlady's eyes were red from crying, having learned overnight that her testimony about the threatening note would also be needed in court. "I never thought I'd be involved in bringing down men like Morrison," she said, her voice shaking. "I'm just a boarding house keeper. I don't know anything about politics or corruption. Sometimes ordinary people are the only ones who can stop extraordinary evil," Eliza said gently. "You're being brave, Mrs. Patterson. Don't doubt that." The waiting was excruciating. Every minute felt stretched thin. Every sound from the street made Eliza's heart jump. At 6:30, a deputy burst into the boarding house, his face flushed with exertion. "Marshal Garrett, news from Helena. Morrison's in custody. He tried to run when marshals showed up, but they caught him before he made it to his horse. He's demanding to see his lawyers, claiming federal overreach, threatening political retaliation, but he's arrested and secured." Garrett's expression showed grim satisfaction. "Good. What about the associates?" "6 of the 8 are in custody. 2 ran. They're being pursued now. And Cole?" The deputy hesitated. "There's been complications at the Cole ranch." Eliza's blood went cold. What kind of complications? When the marshals arrived to arrest Cole, they found the ranch already in chaos. Apparently Cole learned about Morrison's arrest somehow. Maybe a telegraph from Helena. We're not sure. He'd gathered his men, was preparing to flee. Tom Fletcher tried to stop him, said running would only prove guilt. They argued, and it got physical. By the time the marshals moved in, Fletcher had Cole restrained, but 3 of Cole's ranch hands drew weapons. "Was anyone hurt?" Garrett demanded. 2 hands wounded, neither critically. Fletcher took a bullet to the shoulder, but he'll survive. Cole's in custody now, being transported to the Ridgeway jail until he can be transferred to Helena for formal arraignment. Eliza felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief that Nathan hadn't escaped, sorrow that Tom Fletcher had been injured defending justice, and a confusing residual concern for Nathan despite everything he'd done. The man she'd almost married was now in chains, facing decades in prison for conspiracy to murder and kidnapping. The empire he'd built had collapsed in a single morning. "Miss Monroe," Garrett said, interrupting her thoughts. "Cole's asking to see you. He says he has information about Clara Jennings's location, but he'll only share it with you. I told him that was impossible, but he's insisting." "It could be a trap," the deputy said quickly, "a way to get close enough to threaten or harm her." "He's in shackles with armed guards surrounding him," Garrett countered. "He's not in a position to harm anyone. But Miss Monroe, you don't have to do this. We can extract the information through interrogation eventually." Eliza thought about Clara, whose body might still be lying in an unmarked grave somewhere, whose family had spent 4 years wondering what happened to their daughter. If Nathan genuinely knew where she was buried, Eliza owed it to Clara to retrieve that information as quickly as possible. "I'll see him," she said, "but I want armed guards present, and I want to leave for the train station immediately afterward." The Ridgeway jail was a small stone building that smelled of damp earth and desperation. Nathan sat in a cell at the back, his hands shackled, his expensive clothes torn and dirty from the morning's struggle. When Eliza entered, flanked by 2 marshals, he looked up with an expression that contained exhaustion, defeat, and something that might have been genuine remorse. "Eliza, thank you for coming." "I'm here for Clara, not for you," Eliza said, keeping her voice steady despite the roiling emotions in her chest. "Marshal Garrett says you know where she's buried." Nathan winced at the bluntness but nodded. "She's on Morrison's timber property, about 8 miles north of his main holdings. There's an abandoned mining claim there, mostly overgrown. We buried her in what used to be the mine entrance, covered it with rocks and timber to look like a natural collapse." The casual way he said "we buried her" made Eliza feel sick. "You helped bury her body." "Yes." Nathan's voice was hollow. "Morrison's men killed her. I wasn't there for that, I swear. But afterward, Morrison told me we had to dispose of the evidence. He said if I refused, if I went to authorities, I'd be implicated in her death anyway, because I'd been the one who brought her to Montana, who'd given Morrison access to her. He said we'd both hang, or we could both be free if I helped him cover it up." I was terrified, Eliza. I chose survival over conscience, and I've regretted it every day since. "You brought me here knowing what happened to Clara," Eliza said, her voice shaking with anger. "You sent for another mail-order bride knowing that the last one had been murdered for asking questions. What were you planning to do with me if I got too curious? Kill me too?" "No." Nathan stood abruptly, his chains rattling. The marshals tensed, hands on their weapons, but Nathan made no aggressive move. "I swear I would never have hurt you. When I sent for you, I thought, I don't know what I thought, that I could be different this time, that if I just kept you away from Morrison's business, if I managed things more carefully, you'd be safe. I never intended for you to discover what I'd done." But I did discover it. And then what? Would you have let Morrison kill me too, rather than risk your empire? Nathan was silent for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. I don't know. I want to say I would have protected you, that I'd have turned on Morrison before letting him harm you. But I said the same thing to myself about Clara, and when the moment came, I chose self-preservation. So I honestly don't know what I would have done, Eliza, and that terrifies me more than prison does. It was perhaps the most honest thing he'd ever said to her. Eliza felt something shift in her chest, not forgiveness, but a kind of sad understanding. Nathan wasn't a monster, just a weak man who'd made terrible choices when faced with impossible pressures. That didn't excuse what he'd done, but it made him human rather than purely evil. You need to testify against Morrison, Eliza said. Tell them everything, every crime he committed, every person he threatened, every detail of how his operation worked. It won't redeem you, Nathan, but it might give Clara's family closure and prevent other women from suffering the same fate. I'll testify, Nathan said. I'll tell them everything. It's the only decent thing I've done in years, but it's something. He met her eyes. I'm sorry, Eliza. For deceiving you, for bringing you into this nightmare, for being too much of a coward to do the right thing until I had no other choice. You deserved better than the man I turned out to be. Yes, Eliza agreed quietly. I did. We all did. Clara deserved better. Sarah Whitmore deserved better. Every person Morrison destroyed deserved better. But we got you and Morrison instead, men who chose power over principle, wealth over humanity, survival over justice. At least now you'll face consequences for those choices. She turned to leave, but Nathan called out one more time. Eliza, wait. There's something else you should know. The money I offered you in my letter, the payment to help you start over, it's in an account at the Ridgeway Bank in your name. It's not Morrison's money, not tainted by any of his crimes. It's from wheat sales, legitimate earnings. I want you to take it. Use it to build the life you came west to find, the one I destroyed by involving you in this mess. I don't want your money. It's not charity, it's restitution. You lost your chance at security because I was dishonest with you. The least I can do is provide the resources you need to start fresh somewhere Morrison can't reach you. His voice became urgent. Please, Eliza, let me do this one decent thing. Let me help you in the only way I still can. Marshal Garrett cleared his throat. Miss Monroe, we need to leave for the train station. The Chicago train won't wait. Eliza looked at Nathan one last time. This man who'd been wheat farmer, empire builder, conspirator to murder, and finally, repentant prisoner. She couldn't forgive him, might never be able to forgive him, but she could accept that his final gesture came from genuine remorse rather than manipulation. I'll consider it, she said. But Nathan, money doesn't absolve you. Nothing absolves what you did to Clara or what you enabled Morrison to do to so many others. You'll have to live with that for the rest of your life, whether you spend it in prison or somehow earn clemency through cooperation. That's your penance, not a bank account. She left before he could respond, emerging from the jail into morning sunshine that felt almost obscene in its brightness. The world continued turning, indifferent to the dramas of guilt and justice unfolding in small Montana Territory towns. Eliza climbed into the wagon that would take her to the train station, her small bag beside her, Clara's book pressed against her heart. At the station, a small crowd had gathered. Mrs. Grady, recovered from giving her statement and looking both frightened and determined. Mrs. Patterson, who pressed a package of food into Eliza's hands with tearful instructions to eat properly. The sheriff, who shook her hand formally and thanked her for her courage. And surprisingly, Tom Fletcher, his arm in a sling, but his expression resolute. Miss Monroe, Fletcher said, approaching carefully, I wanted to apologize. I knew things weren't right at the ranch, knew Mr. Cole was hiding things. I should have spoken up sooner, should have questioned what was happening. Maybe if I had, Clara Jennings would still be alive. Maybe, Eliza agreed. Or maybe you'd be dead too. Morrison killed anyone who threatened him, Tom. You're alive because you didn't ask questions that would have made you dangerous. I'm not sure I can judge you for that survival instinct. I can judge myself, though, Fletcher said quietly. And I'm going to have to live with knowing I could have stopped this years ago if I'd been braver. But I want you to know, When they needed someone to testify about the ranch operations, about what Cole knew and when he knew it, I volunteered. I'll tell them everything I saw, every suspicious conversation I overheard, every time I looked the other way when I should have investigated. It won't bring Clara back, but maybe it'll help convict the people responsible. That takes courage too, Eliza said. Admitting complicity, accepting responsibility for inaction. Not everyone can do that. The train whistle sounded in the distance, and Marshal Garrett touched Eliza's elbow gently. Time to go, Miss Monroe. Your escorts are already on board, and we've secured a private compartment for you. The journey east takes 3 days with connections, but you'll be safe the entire way. Eliza turned to face the small group who'd gathered to see her off, these people who'd become witnesses and allies in bringing down corruption that had poisoned Montana territory for years. Thank you, she said, addressing all of them. For believing me, for supporting me, for choosing truth, even when it was dangerous. Clara Jennings didn't have that support, and it cost her everything. I'll always be grateful that I did. Mrs. Grady embraced her tightly. You're a brave woman, Eliza Monroe. Braver than I was. Braver than most people ever have to be. Whatever life you build for yourself, you should be proud of the foundation you're starting from. Integrity and courage, not money and lies. The train pulled into the station, steam hissing, metal squealing against metal. Eliza climbed aboard with Marshal Garrett's assistance, settling into the private compartment where 2 stern-faced marshals already waited. As the train began to move, she looked out the window at Ridgeway receding into the distance, the town where she'd arrived desperate and hopeful, where she'd discovered an empire built on blood, where she'd chosen justice over survival and truth over safety. The landscape rolled past. Golden grasslands, distant mountains, the vast Montana sky that had seemed so overwhelming when she first arrived. Now it simply seemed like geography, a place she was leaving behind rather than a future she was embracing. Somewhere in these mountains, searchers were already digging for Clara Jennings' body, following Nathan's directions to that abandoned mine. Somewhere in Helena, Charles Morrison was being interrogated, his empire of corruption finally exposed to sunlight. And somewhere ahead, on tracks leading east toward Chicago and a new life, Eliza was becoming someone different than the desperate seamstress who'd answered a wheat farmer's advertisement. The journey took 3 days as promised, stopping in various towns to change trains, to rest, to continue eastward away from Montana's complicated moral landscape. The marshals were professional and kind, ensuring Eliza's comfort and safety while maintaining appropriate distance. On the second day, one of them, a younger man named Davis, asked what she planned to do when she reached Chicago. I don't know yet, Eliza admitted. Find work, I suppose. Start over with whatever money Nathan's restitution provides. Build something clean and honest that doesn't depend on anyone else's power or protection. That's a good goal, Davis said. Most witnesses we relocate, they struggle with starting over, lose themselves in grief or an anger or fear, but you seem different, determined rather than defeated. I'm angry, Eliza said, and afraid sometimes when I think about what could have happened if I hadn't escaped. But I'm also grateful. I came west looking for survival through marriage, through making myself useful to a man who'd provide for me. Instead, I learned I could survive on my own terms, that I didn't need a husband to give my life meaning or security. That's worth everything I lost. Chicago rose before them on the 4th morning, a sprawling city of buildings and smoke and endless anonymous crowds where a woman could disappear and rebuild without anyone knowing her history. The marshals escorted Eliza to a modest boarding house in a respectable neighborhood, paid 2 months' rent in advance, and provided her with documents under her new name, Elizabeth Moore, recently arrived from Ohio, no family, seeking employment as a seamstress or shopkeeper. The federal prosecutor's office will contact you when Morrison's trial begins, Marshal Garrett said, having traveled with them from Montana. You'll need to return to testify, but we'll provide transportation and protection. Until then, Miss Monroe, or Miss Moore, I should say, live your life, be ordinary, be safe, and don't contact anyone from Montana territory, not even to check on how the case is progressing. We'll keep you informed. After they left, Eliza stood in her small rented room and felt the overwhelming weight of new beginning settle over her. Everything was different now. Her name, her city, her circumstances, her understanding of herself. The girl from Boston, who'd become a desperate seamstress, no longer existed. The mail-order bride who'd traveled to Montana seeking a wheat farmer was gone too. And the woman who'd uncovered murder and chosen truth over safety was now transforming into someone else entirely, someone she'd have to discover one day at a time. She spent the next weeks establishing her new life. She found work at a dressmaker's shop on the north side, where her skills were appreciated and her quiet competence was valued. She made acquaintances carefully, the other seamstresses, the boarding house residents, the shopkeepers on her street, building a network of ordinary relationships that had nothing to do with empire or corruption or men's ambitions. She read newspapers obsessively, following the Montana Territory case as it developed in the national press. The trial was sensational. Charles Morrison faced 23 counts including conspiracy to murder, fraud, bribery, and racketeering. Nathan Cole had turned state's witness, providing devastating testimony about Morrison's operations in exchange for reduced charges. The defense tried to paint Morrison as a legitimate businessman, unfairly targeted by federal overreach, but the evidence was overwhelming. Documentation of fraudulent land deals, witnesses describing intimidation and threats, and most damning, Clara Jennings' body, recovered from exactly where Nathan had indicated, bearing evidence of violent death. Clara's family attended the trial every day, and newspapers published their grief-stricken testimony about a daughter who'd gone west seeking adventure and found murder instead. Sarah Whitmore's father, now elderly and ill, gave emotional testimony about losing his daughter in what he'd believed was a tragic accident, only to learn decades later that she'd been murdered and her death concealed. The accumulated weight of Morrison's crimes, presented across weeks of testimony, built an unassailable case that not even his expensive lawyers and political connections could overcome. 3 months after Eliza left Montana, she received a telegram from the prosecutor's office. Morrison convicted all counts. Stop sentencing 20 years federal prison. Stop. 8 associates also convicted. Stop Cole. Sentenced 5 years reduced for cooperation. Stop. Your testimony was crucial. Stop. Justice served. Stop. Eliza read the telegram 3 times, feeling something complicated and cathartic wash through her. Justice had been served. The empire built on blood had collapsed. Clara Jennings and Sarah Whitmore had been avenged, their families finally receiving closure after years of uncertainty. And the men responsible, Morrison and Nathan and their associates, would spend years in prison paying for their crimes. That evening, Eliza walked to Lake Michigan and stood watching the sun set over the water. She thought about all the women whose lives had intersected with Morrison's greed. Sarah Whitmore, who died young and been buried like trash. Clara Jennings, who'd asked brave questions and been silenced. Mrs. Grady, who'd finally found courage to speak truth. Mrs. Patterson, who'd provided small kindnesses that helped Eliza survive. And herself, Eliza Monroe, who'd come west desperate and left empowered, who'd lost a false future and gained a real one. The money Nathan had left her was substantial, enough to live on for years or to invest in building something larger. After weeks of consideration, Eliza made her decision. She rented a small shop in a busy neighborhood, hired 2 other seamstresses who needed work, and opened a dressmaking business that served working women who needed affordable, well-made clothing. She called it Moore's Dress Works, using her new name, building something entirely her own that owed nothing to men's empires or corrupt bargains. The business grew slowly but steadily. Women came for practical dresses and stayed because Eliza's shop felt different, a place where women's voices were heard, where fair prices met quality work, where customers were treated as partners rather than sources of profit. Within a year, Moore's Dress Works employed 6 seamstresses. Within 2 years, Eliza had opened a second location. And within 3 years, she was training young women in the business skills they'd need to eventually open their own shops, passing on the knowledge she'd gained through surviving Montana's corruption. She never married. Men expressed interest occasionally, customers' brothers, fellow shop owners, men who saw a successful businesswoman and imagined themselves as her partner or protector. But Eliza had learned that partnership required equality, that protection often masked control, and that she didn't need a husband to give her life meaning or security. She'd come west believing marriage was survival, had discovered that survival required only courage and principle and willingness to work hard for what you wanted. 4 years after leaving Montana, Eliza received another letter from the prosecutor's office. this time containing news she'd been expecting but dreading. Nathan Cole had died in federal prison, killed during a riot he'd tried to stop. The letter included a note Nathan had written before his death, to be delivered to Eliza if anything happened to him. Eliza, if you're reading this, I'm dead, and probably I deserved it. Prison has given me a lot of time to think about the choices I made, the people I hurt, the cowardice I displayed when courage was required. I don't expect forgiveness. I haven't forgiven myself. But I wanted you to know that testifying against Morrison was the first truly brave thing I'd done in years. Your example showed me what courage looked like, what integrity demanded. I'm sorry I couldn't live up to that standard until circumstances forced me to. I've arranged for the remainder of my legitimate assets to be divided between Clara Jennings' family, Sarah Whitmore's father, and you. It's not enough to compensate for what was taken from any of you, but it's all I have to give. Use your portion however you think will do the most good. I trust your judgment more than I ever trusted my own. Thank you for refusing to become another victim. Thank you for choosing truth when silence would have been easier. And thank you for showing me, even briefly, what kind of person I should have been all along. Nathan Eliza folded the letter carefully and placed it in the box where she kept Clara's book and other mementos from Montana. Nathan's death didn't change what he'd done, didn't erase his complicity in murder and corruption. But his final gesture, dividing his assets among his victims, suggested he'd finally understood the weight of his choices. It was too late for redemption, but perhaps not too late for restitution. The money, when it arrived, was substantial. Eliza used her portion to establish a fund for women seeking to escape difficult situations, women fleeing violence, women needing education, women who simply needed a chance to build lives on their own terms. She called it the Clara Jennings Memorial Fund, ensuring that the woman who died for asking brave questions would be remembered for inspiring courage in others. 5 years after leaving Montana Territory, now established Chicago businesswoman Elizabeth Moore, Eliza received an unexpected visitor at her shop. A young woman, perhaps 19, with Clara Jennings' blonde hair and delicate features, stood nervously in the doorway. "Miss Moore? My name is Ruth Jennings. I'm Clara's younger sister. I wanted to meet the woman who helped bring justice for Clara's death and whose testimony allowed our family to finally have closure." Eliza embraced the girl, feeling tears she'd held back for years finally overflow. "Your sister was brave," she said. "She asked questions powerful men didn't want answered, and it cost her everything. But her courage wasn't wasted, Ruth. It inspired me to be brave too, to choose truth over safety. Without Clara's example, I might have stayed silent, and Morrison's corruption would have continued destroying lives." They talked for hours, about Clara's dreams and fears, about the years her family had spent wondering what happened, about the relief of finally having answers, even though those answers were terrible. Ruth mentioned that she was considering going to college, becoming a lawyer, fighting corruption through the legal system. "I want to do what Clara tried to do," Ruth said. "Expose injustice, protect vulnerable people, make sure powerful men face consequences when they abuse their power. Clara didn't succeed in her lifetime, but maybe I can succeed in mine, carrying on what she started." Eliza felt something shift in her chest, a sense that Clara's death, while tragic and unjust, had ultimately created ripples that would continue spreading long after the immediate crisis had resolved. Ruth would become a lawyer fighting for justice. The Clara Jennings Memorial Fund would help hundreds of women escape dangerous situations. And Eliza herself had built something real and good from the ashes of Montana's corruption. "Your sister would be proud of you," Eliza said. "And I'm honored to help support your education." The Memorial Fund was created for exactly this purpose, turning tragedy into opportunity, ensuring that women who display courage and principle have resources to pursue their goals. After Ruth left, Eliza stood in her shop surrounded by the life she'd built, the employees she'd trained, the customers she'd served, the business she'd created through her own labor and integrity. This was nothing like what she'd imagined when she answered Nathan Cole's advertisement 5 years ago. She'd expected to become a farmer's wife, to find security through marriage, to survive by making herself useful to a man who'd provide for her. Instead, she'd discovered that survival didn't require marriage, that security came from her own skills and courage, and that the most useful thing she could do was build something honest that served other women seeking similar freedom. 10 years after leaving Montana Territory, Eliza, still Elizabeth Moore to Chicago society, attended the territorial celebration marking Montana's admission to the Union as the 41st state. The newspapers covered the festivities extensively, noting how far Montana had come from the days of corruption and violence that had once characterized territorial politics. Reforms had been implemented, new officials had been elected, and the Morrison scandal had become a cautionary tale used to justify stronger federal oversight of resource development. Eliza read these accounts with mixed feelings. Progress had been made, certainly, but at enormous cost. The women who died, the families who'd been displaced, the years of corruption that had gone unchecked before finally being exposed. She wondered how many other territories, how many other frontier regions were currently operating under similar systems of exploitation and violence, waiting for their own whistleblowers to emerge and their own reformers to take power. The question led her to a new venture. Using profits from Moore's Dressworks and remaining funds from the memorial, Eliza began funding investigative journalism into territorial corruption. She hired writers to examine land deals, interview displaced families, document suspicious deaths, and disappeared witnesses. The resulting articles, published in progressive newspapers and magazines, helped expose similar patterns in Wyoming, Idaho, and the Dakotas. Some investigations led to prosecutions, others to reforms, and all of them to greater public awareness of how Western development often came at the cost of justice and human dignity. 15 years after leaving Montana, Eliza received a letter from Tom Fletcher, now sheriff of Ridgway and working to rebuild the town's reputation after the Morrison scandal. He wrote that the coal ranch had been purchased by a collective of smaller farmers who divided the land among themselves, creating the kind of diversified agricultural community that should have existed before Morrison's consolidation. The Hendricks family, who'd lost land to Nathan's expansion, had been able to buy back part of their original holdings at fair prices, and a memorial had been erected for Clara Jennings and Sarah Whitmore, honoring the women whose deaths had finally exposed territorial corruption. "Your courage started this healing process," Fletcher wrote. "Without your testimony, Morrison would still be operating, Nathan would still be building his empire, and women would still be disappearing when they asked inconvenient questions. Ridgway isn't perfect now, but it's better. Honest, mostly. Working toward justice instead of just profit. That's something worth being proud of." Eliza kept the letter, adding it to her Montana collection. She was 40 years old now, her life measured not in husbands and children, the markers society expected, but in businesses built, women helped, reforms achieved, and justice served. It wasn't the life she'd imagined for herself when she left Boston, desperate and hopeless. It was infinitely better. On the 20th anniversary of leaving Montana Territory, Eliza made a decision that surprised even herself. She traveled west again, not to Montana, but to neighboring Idaho, where she'd learned a similar pattern of corruption was developing. She arrived not as a desperate mail-order bride, but as an established businesswoman with resources and connections, someone who could fund investigations and support women who needed help escaping dangerous situations. She established a new Moore's Dressworks in Boise, hired local seamstresses, and began building the same kind of community she'd created in Chicago. But she also began meeting with women in situations similar to what hers had been. Women seeking mail-order marriages out of desperation. Women who'd discovered their husbands weren't what they'd claimed. Women who'd uncovered corruption and didn't know where to turn. Eliza provided them with options she'd never had: financial support, legal assistance, safe housing, and most importantly, the knowledge that they didn't have to choose between survival and integrity. Some women chose to stay with their husbands, to make the best of difficult situations, to build lives within the constraints they'd discovered. Others chose to leave, to start over, to risk uncertainty rather than accept compromise. Eliza supported both choices, understanding that each woman's circumstances were unique and that judgment helped no one. What mattered was ensuring women had actual choices, real agency, freedom to determine their own futures rather than having futures determined by men's ambitions or society's expectations. 25 years after leaving Montana, Eliza was 64 years old, still running Moore's Dressworks with locations in 3 cities, still funding investigations into corruption, still supporting women seeking to escape exploitation. She'd never married, never had children in the traditional sense, But she'd mentored dozens of young women, helped hundreds find their footing, and influenced thousands through her business model and philanthropic work. A young journalist interviewed her for a story about women entrepreneurs in the West. During the interview, the journalist asked about her decision never to marry. "Wasn't it lonely?" the young woman asked. "Building all of this without a partner, without family?" Eliza considered the question seriously. "I came west seeking a partner 25 years ago. A wheat farmer who promised honest work and simple truths. What I found instead was an empire builder who dealt in deception and moral compromise. That experience taught me that partnership isn't about having someone provide for you. It's about mutual respect, shared values, and equal power. I never found a man who wanted that kind of partnership. Most men wanted a wife who'd support their ambitions without questioning their methods. So I chose to be my own partner, to build my own empire, to make my own compromises based on my own principles." "Do you ever regret it?" the journalist asked. "Choosing independence over companionship?" "I've never been without companionship," Eliza said. "I have friends, employees, women I've mentored, who've become like family. What I've been without is dependence on men's money, men's power, men's willingness to protect me. And I don't regret that for a moment. Dependence made me vulnerable to exploitation. Independence made me powerful enough to fight that exploitation, both for myself and for other women." The article, when published, sparked conversation across the Western states about women's roles, business ownership, and the hidden costs of traditional marriage arrangements. Some people praised Eliza's choices as pioneering and brave. Others criticized her as unnatural, selfish, a woman who'd rejected her proper role. Eliza read both the praise and criticism with equal detachment, understanding that her life's meaning came not from others' opinions, but from her own assessment of whether she'd lived according to her principles. On her 70th birthday, Eliza sat in the original Moore's Dressworks location in Chicago, surrounded by women whose lives she'd touched. Former employees who'd gone on to open their own businesses, women she'd helped escape dangerous situations, who'd rebuilt successful lives, young activists and journalists who'd been inspired by her example. Ruth Jennings was there too, now a prominent attorney who'd argued landmark cases establishing women's rights to own property and conduct business independently. "To Eliza Monroe," Ruth said, raising her glass. "Or Elizabeth Moore, depending on which life we're celebrating. To a woman who came west desperate and left empowered, who chose truth over safety, justice over compromise, and integrity over survival. Your courage 25 years ago started ripples that are still spreading, still changing lives, still proving that one person's choice to speak truth can topple empires built on lies." The assembled women echoed the toast, and Eliza felt something profound settle in her chest. Contentment, perhaps, or maybe just the deep satisfaction of knowing she'd lived fully and honestly, that her life had mattered in ways both large and small, that the desperate seamstress who'd answered a wheat farmer's advertisement had become something neither she nor anyone else had imagined possible. She thought of Clara Jennings sometimes, the woman who'd died before her, whose courage had inspired Eliza's own. She thought of Sarah Whitmore, whose body had lain hidden for years before finally receiving justice. She thought of all the women who'd been victims of men's ambitions, who'd been silenced or displaced or destroyed by empires built on blood and lies. And she thought about the women who'd survived, who'd spoken truth, who'd chosen integrity over comfort and agency over security. Women like Mrs. Grady, who'd finally found courage to testify. Women like Ruth Jennings, who transformed her sister's death into a life spent fighting for justice. Women like herself who'd come west seeking survival through marriage and discovered instead that survival required only courage, principle, and willingness to stand against powerful men when standing was dangerous. That night, lying in bed in the comfortable apartment she'd built with her own money and maintained through her own work, Eliza thought about that frightened young woman who'd stepped off the stagecoach in Ridgway, Montana 25 years ago. She'd been desperate, broke, dependent, and hopeless. She'd believed her only value came from making herself useful to a man, that survival required accepting whatever situation presented itself, that women without husbands were doomed to poverty and obscurity. How wrong she'd been. How magnificently, transformatively wrong. Her life hadn't been easy. She'd lost the false security Nathan's wealth would have provided. She'd faced threats, danger, poverty at times, and constant struggle against societal expectations. But she'd gained something infinitely more valuable: autonomy, self-respect, and the knowledge that her life belonged to her alone, to shape according to her own vision and values. She'd come west seeking survival. She'd found something far greater, a life she'd claimed entirely for herself, built on foundations of truth rather than lies, sustained by courage rather than compromise. She'd become not what society expected, not what men wanted, but precisely what she'd chosen to be. A woman whose power came from integrity, whose security came from competence, and whose legacy would endure long after she was gone. That was worth everything she'd lost. That was worth every risk she'd taken, every comfortable lie she'd rejected, every safe harbor she'd abandoned in pursuit of honest truth. Eliza Monroe had come west to marry a wheat farmer. Instead, she'd become something far more important: herself, fully realized, uncompromising, and finally, gloriously free. And as she drifted towards sleep, she thought one final time of Clara Jennings, the woman who'd shown her what courage looked like, what integrity demanded, what price might be required for choosing truth over safety. Clara hadn't survived to see justice done, or to build the life she'd deserved. But through Eliza, through Ruth, through all the women their combined courage had inspired and protected, Clara's legacy lived on. "Thank you," Eliza whispered into the darkness, speaking to the ghost of the woman she'd never met but would never forget. "Thank you for showing me the path. Thank you for being brave even when bravery cost you everything. I've tried to honor your sacrifice by living the kind of life you should have had, free, honest, uncompromising, and entirely my own. I hope wherever you are, you know that your death wasn't meaningless, that it changed everything for women like us. Rest well, Clara. Justice was served, empires fell, and women survived. That's the best memorial I could give you." And in the quiet of her comfortable room, surrounded by evidence of a life well lived and honorably built, Eliza Monroe, Elizabeth Moore, former desperate seamstress, former mail-order bride, current business owner, philanthropist, and force for justice, finally allowed herself to rest, knowing her story had ended not with dependence or compromise, but with power reclaimed and a life claimed entirely on her own terms.